When death came knocking. In the unforgiving Wyoming territory of 1876, widowed rancher Ethan Cole faced an impossible choice: crawl toward his 4 infant children and die beside them, or lie still beneath his porch and let the rattlesnake's venom take him alone. Either way, the babies would be orphaned by sunset. But fate had already sent a stranger riding toward his gate, a woman with a loaf of bread, a physician's knowledge, and nothing left to lose. Before we begin, I invite you to stay with me until the very end of this story. If it moves you, please leave a like and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. Now, let us return to that brutal summer day when everything changed. The Wyoming sun beat down merciless and white on the afternoon of July 14, 1876, turning the dust to powder and the air to furnace breath. Ethan Cole crouched beneath the sagging porch of his homestead, hammer in one scarred hand, trying to shore up the rotting support beam before the whole structure collapsed on itself. Sweat carved rivulets through the grime on his face. His shirt clung to his back. Somewhere inside the cabin, one of the babies was crying. He could no longer tell which one by sound alone. They all cried. Constantly. He'd been working since dawn. The fence by the north pasture, the chicken coop door, the roof shingles that kept peeling away in the wind like old skin. Now this. Always something breaking, something failing, something demanding his attention when there were already 4 somethings inside that house who needed him more than wood and nails ever could. Margaret had been dead 9 months. 9 months since the fever took her 3 days after little Samuel's birth. 9 months since Ethan had buried his wife on the hillside overlooking the creek she'd loved, under the cottonwood that bloomed white every spring. 9 months of trying to be 2 parents to 4 children who couldn't understand why their mother never came back. 4 babies. 4. Samuel was 9 months old. The twins, Matthew and Michael, had just turned 2 last month. Not that Ethan had done anything to mark the occasion beyond an extra spoonful of applesauce. And Rebecca, his eldest, was 2.5, barely old enough to toddle around the cabin without falling, let alone help with her brothers. He positioned another nail, drew back the hammer. The confined space beneath the porch smelled of earth and old wood and something else, something dry and ancient that made the hair on his forearms prickle. The rattle started low, almost conversational. Ethan froze. His eyes adjusted to the shadows, and there it was. Coiled against the foundation stones not 3 feet from his left hand, thick as his wrist, easily 5 feet long. A prairie rattlesnake disturbed from whatever cool refuge it had found beneath his home. Its flat, triangular head swayed slightly. Its tail, God, that tail, vibrated so fast it blurred, creating that sound that turned men's spines to water. Time slowed to the pace of honey dripping. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to scramble backward, out from under the porch, to get away. But Ethan had been raised on this frontier. He knew that sudden movement meant death. The snake was already defensive, already warning him. Any quick motion would trigger the strike. So he held perfectly still, barely breathing, sweat now running freely down his temples, not from heat but from pure animal terror. The hammer felt impossibly heavy in his grip. Useless. There was no way to swing it in this cramped space, no angle that wouldn't leave him exposed. From inside the cabin, the crying intensified. Rebecca's voice joined the chorus now, calling for him. "Papa? Papa?" The snake's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, tasting his fear. Ethan's mind raced through possibilities. If he called out, if he made noise, the snake might strike. If he tried to ease backward, the movement might trigger it. If he stayed frozen here, eventually his muscles would cramp, would betray him. And if he died here, beneath this porch, then what? Who would find him? Who would care for his children? The nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, and that neighbor was Josiah Brennan, a bachelor who could barely care for himself, let alone 4 babies. The town was 12 miles south. Help was... The snake shifted, its coils adjusted, its head turned more fully toward him. Ethan made his choice. He would try to back away slowly, inch by agonizing inch. It was the only option that gave him any chance at all. He began to ease his weight backward, muscles screaming from holding the crouch for so long, moving with the kind of patience that felt like torture. 1 inch. 2. The snake watched, waited. 3 inches. 4. Papa! Rebecca's voice, more insistent now, accompanied by the sound of small feet on floorboards. She was coming to the door. Stay inside, Becca! Ethan's voice came out hoarse, strangled. Don't come out! The snake's rattle increased in tempo, and then Rebecca opened the door. The sudden flood of light from the doorway, the shadow it cast beneath the porch, the creak of hinges. It was too much. The rattlesnake struck. Ethan saw it coming, saw the triangular head launch forward with impossible speed, and he jerked his leg back on pure instinct, almost fast enough. Almost. The fangs caught him on the outside of his left calf, punching through his canvas trousers like they were paper. Hot, burning. The snake's mouth opened impossibly wide, and Ethan felt the pressure of those fangs sinking deeper, felt the venom pumping into his muscle. He roared, pain and terror and rage all mixed together, and smashed down with the hammer. Missed. The snake had already released him, was coiling back for another strike. Ethan scrambled backward, banged his head on a crossbeam, didn't care, kept moving. His boot caught on a rock and he sprawled out from beneath the porch into the blinding afternoon sunlight. Rebecca stood in the doorway, eyes huge, face pale, her rag doll clutched to her chest. Inside! Ethan gasped. Get inside, baby girl, now! She fled. The door slammed. Ethan looked down at his leg. 2 puncture wounds already swelling, already turning the flesh around them an ugly purple red. He could feel the venom spreading, a sick heat that crawled up his calf like something alive. His hands shook as he yanked his belt free and wrapped it around his thigh, just above the knee, pulling it tight. Not a tourniquet. He'd seen men lose limbs from tourniquets left on too long, but tight enough to slow the venom's spread. Maybe. He didn't know. Margaret would have known. Margaret's father had been a doctor back in Ohio, and she'd learned things, had books. The books. There were medical books somewhere in the cabin, in one of the trunks. But Ethan's vision was already starting to blur at the edges. His mouth tasted of copper. The sunlight seemed too bright, then too dim, pulsing in waves. He tried to stand. His left leg buckled immediately, folding beneath him like wet cloth. He went down hard on the packed dirt of the yard, breath knocked from his lungs. Pain exploded up his spine. From inside the cabin, all 4 children were crying now. The sound came to him distorted as if through water. Ethan dragged himself forward on his elbows. 6 feet to the porch steps. Might as well have been 6 miles. Every movement sent fresh agony through his leg. The swelling was worse already. He could feel his calf straining against the fabric of his trousers, feel the skin stretching tight and hot. 3 feet. His vision grayed out. He stopped, gasping, forehead pressed to the dirt. The earth smelled like summer, like dust and grass and the distant promise of rain that never came. He thought about Margaret on the hillside, thought about joining her there under the cottonwood. It would be easier, the pain would stop. But the babies. His babies. Ethan growled and pulled himself forward another foot, then another. His fingers found the bottom step. He gripped it, hauled himself up. His arms were shaking. The venom was spreading faster now. He could feel it, a sickness creeping through his blood, turning his muscles to water, his thoughts to fog. He got his right leg under him, pushed up, made it to his knees on the porch. The door was 10 feet away. 10 feet. Inside, Rebecca was trying to soothe her brothers. He could hear her little voice, high and frightened, singing the lullaby Margaret used to sing. Hush, little baby, don't say a word. She didn't know all the words. She kept starting over. Ethan crawled forward. The porch boards were rough beneath his palms. A splinter drove deep into his thumb. He didn't feel it. 5 feet from the door, his left arm gave out. He collapsed onto his side, cheek against the weathered wood. The sky above was impossibly blue, stretched tight as canvas. A hawk circled high overhead, riding thermals, hunting. 3 feet. He couldn't feel his left leg anymore. That was bad. That was very bad. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, too fast, irregular. His breath came in short gasps. Nausea rolled through his gut. Ethan reached out one more time. His fingers brushed the door jamb. And that was as far as he got. His vision tunneled down to a pinpoint of light, then went dark. The last thing he heard was Rebecca, still singing. How long he lay there, Ethan couldn't say. Seconds or certainty that he was dying, that his children would be alone, that he had failed them. Then hoofbeats. At first he thought he was hallucinating. The sound came from very far away, muffled, like hearing the world from the bottom of a well. But it grew louder, closer, definitely real. The horse stopped somewhere near the gate. Ethan tried to open his eyes. Couldn't. His eyelids weighed 1,000 pounds each. Footsteps on the path. Quick, light, a woman's footsteps. Sweet, merciful. The voice was female, young, with an accent he couldn't place. Eastern, educated. Sir, can you hear me? Hands on his shoulder, rolling him onto his back, gentle but firm, competent. Ethan forced his eyes open. The face that swam into view above him was surrounded by a halo of sunlight. Honey blonde hair escaping from a bun, gray-green eyes wide with concern, fair skin flushed from the heat and now from alarm. She couldn't have been more than 25. Snake, Ethan managed to croak. Rattler, bit me. Her eyes dropped immediately to his leg. He heard her sharp intake of breath. How long ago? Don't know. Can't. The darkness was pulling at him again. Babies, inside. 4 babies, please. Shh. I've got you. I've got them. Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that commanded trust. Stay with me. What's your name? Ethan. Ethan Cole. I'm Clara Whitfield. I'm going to help you, Ethan, but I need you to stay conscious. Can you do that for me? He wanted to. He really did. But the darkness had other ideas. Ethan! Too late. The world slipped away again. Consciousness returned in fragments. Coolness on his forehead, a damp cloth. Voices. Clara's voice speaking softly, and children's voices. Rebecca. Still crying, but quieter now. It's all right, sweetheart. Your papa is going to be just fine. Can you show me where he keeps his knives? A sharp knife? Good girl. You're such a brave girl. Ethan tried to speak. Managed only a groan. He's coming around. Clara's face appeared above him again. They were inside now. He could see the cabin ceiling, the exposed beams, the cobwebs in the corners he'd been meaning to clear. She'd gotten him inside somehow, dragged him. This slip of a woman had dragged a man who outweighed her by 80 pounds across the porch and through the door. This is going to hurt, Clara said. Her voice held genuine apology. I'm sorry, there's no help for it. She had his leg propped up on something. The kitchen table, he realized distantly. His trouser leg had been cut away. The swelling was grotesque, his calf bloated to twice its normal size, the skin mottled purple and black, and a sickly yellow-green. Clara held a knife. The blade gleamed in the light from the window. Wait, Ethan gasped. What are you? Your leg needs to drain. The venom has to come out. Her gray-green eyes met his, and he saw both fear and determination there. My father was a physician. I've seen this done. But I won't lie to you. It's going to be excruciating. Do it. His voice was steadier than he expected. If I die, the children... You're not going to die. She said it with such conviction that he almost believed her. Rebecca, take your brothers into the other room. Close the door. But, Papa... Now, sweetheart, be brave for me. Small footsteps retreated. A door closed. Clara positioned the knife above the first fang mark. Her hand was steady. Bite down on this. She pressed a folded leather strap between his teeth. Ready? Ethan nodded. The knife bit deep. The scream that tore from Ethan's throat was muffled by the leather, but still loud enough to shake the rafters. White-hot agony exploded through his leg, through his entire body. Dark blood and yellowish fluid gushed from the wound. Clara pressed down on either side of the incision, forcing more poison out, and Ethan's vision went white. When he could see again, she was already making the second cut. This time, he did pass out. He woke to twilight. Purple light slanted through the windows. The cabin was quiet except for the soft sounds of babies sleeping and a woman humming something low and tuneless. Ethan turned his head. Clara sat in Margaret's rocking chair near the fireplace, holding Samuel. The baby was asleep against her shoulder. The twins were curled together in their wooden cradle, and Rebecca, his brave Rebecca, was sprawled on a blanket near Clara's feet, one thumb in her mouth, her rag doll clutched to her chest. His leg throbbed with a deep, bone-level ache, but the sick, spreading heat of the venom was gone. He could wiggle his toes. That seemed miraculous. Clara noticed him watching. She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to something luminous. "Welcome back," she said softly, careful not to wake the children. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been kicked by a horse." And then the horse backed up and did it again. His voice was rough, scratchy. His throat felt like sandpaper. "That's actually a good sign. If you felt nothing at all, I'd be worried." She stood carefully, settling Samuel into the cradle with his brothers, then brought Ethan a cup of water. She helped him sit up enough to drink, one hand supporting the back of his head. The water was cool, sweet, the best thing he'd ever tasted. He drained the cup. "Easy," Clara cautioned. "Not too much at once, or you'll be sick." He lay back, studying her in the growing darkness. She looked exhausted. Her hair had come completely loose from its bun. Her dress was stained with his blood and other fluids he didn't want to contemplate, and there were deep shadows under her eyes, but she moved with purpose, with confidence, like a woman who knew exactly what needed doing and intended to do it. "Who are you?" Ethan asked. "Where did you come from?" Clara returned to the rocking chair, sinking into it with a sigh. "I told you, Clara Whitfield. I arrived in Sweetwater Springs 3 days ago. I'm the new school teacher." 3 days. "And you're already making house calls?" "Hardly. I was bringing you bread." She gestured toward the table, where a cloth-wrapped loaf sat forgotten. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house said you had children, said you'd been managing alone since your wife passed. She thought you might appreciate something fresh-baked." Clara's smile turned wry. "I had no idea I'd be performing surgery. You saved my life. Perhaps, or perhaps you'd have managed on your own." "No." Ethan was certain of that. "I'd be dead, and the children—" He couldn't finish the thought. Clara was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I lost both my parents to cholera last winter. I know what it means to be alone. I couldn't—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I couldn't leave them alone. Not if there was anything I could do." The pieces clicked together. Young, educated, traveling west alone, running from grief, just like everyone else on this frontier was running from something. "Thank you," Ethan said simply. There were no words adequate for what she'd done, but those two seemed as good as any. "You're welcome." Clara stood again, all business. "Now, you need to rest. I've cleaned and dressed the wound as best I can, but you'll need proper medical attention." "Is there a doctor in town?" "Doc Brennan, about 12 miles south." "Then someone needs to fetch him, tonight. That wound needs professional care, and you need to be watched for fever, infection, complications." "I can't ride, can't even walk." "I know." Clara moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Which means I'll have to go." "You?" Ethan tried to sit up, failed. "You can't ride 12 miles alone in the dark. There are wolves, mountain lions, bandits." "I'm an excellent rider, and I have your rifle." She'd found Margaret's old Winchester, propped it by the door. "Unless you have a better suggestion?" He didn't, and that galled him more than the pain in his leg. "The children," Ethan said. "You can't leave them alone with me. Not like this. If something happens, if they need—" "Rebecca is a capable girl. She'll help you." Clara was already moving, gathering supplies, checking the rifle. She moved like someone who'd made her decision and wouldn't be swayed. "I'll be back before dawn with the doctor. Keep the wound clean, drink water, and if your fever spikes or you start seeing things, have Rebecca put cool cloths on your head and chest." She was giving instructions to a 2.5-year-old. The absurdity of it would have made Ethan laugh if he'd had the strength. Clara paused at the door, her hand on the frame. In the dying light, she looked impossibly young and impossibly determined. "I'll come back," she said. "I promise." "I believe you." And strangely, he did. The door closed behind her. Hoofbeats faded into the distance. Ethan lay in the gathering darkness, surrounded by sleeping children, his leg a mass of fire and ache, and wondered who Clara Whitfield really was. What had brought her to this hard country? What demons she was running from? Whether she'd really come back? The night deepened. Pain crept through him in waves. Ethan drifted in and out of fevered half-sleep, dreaming of snakes and angels and a woman with gray-green eyes who promised she'd return. Rebecca woke sometime in the dark hours, frightened by bad dreams. She climbed up beside him on the bed, Margaret's bed, their bed, and curled against his good side like a kitten seeking warmth. "Papa?" Her voice was very small. "Is the lady coming back?" "Yes, baby girl. She's coming back." "Promise?" "Promise." Rebecca fell asleep again with her head on his shoulder. Ethan stared at the ceiling beams and tried to believe his own words, tried to have faith that Clara Whitfield would keep her promise, that dawn would bring help instead of disaster, that maybe, just maybe, his luck was finally changing. Outside, coyotes sang to the stars. The wind picked up, rattling the loose shingles. And somewhere in the darkness, a lone rider raced south toward town, carrying all their hopes on her shoulders. Dawn came slow and red, painting the eastern sky the color of blood. Ethan had slept poorly, waking every hour to check on the children, to shift his throbbing leg, to listen for hoofbeats that never came. By the time weak sunlight began filtering through the windows, he'd convinced himself that something had happened to Clara, that she'd been thrown from her horse, attacked by wolves, lost in the darkness, that he'd sent her to her death. Rebecca stirred beside him, yawned, sat up, her hair stuck out in all directions. "Morning, Papa." "Morning, sweetheart." "I'm hungry." Of course she was. They were always hungry. Ethan looked toward the kitchen area, calculating. There was cornmeal in the tin, eggs from the chickens, if any of them had laid, milk from the cow, if he could convince Rebecca to do the milking, though at 2.5 that was asking a lot. "Can you get your brothers up?" Ethan asked. "Get them changed?" Rebecca's face fell. She hated changing the twins. They squirmed and kicked and made it nearly impossible, but she nodded bravely and slid off the bed. Ethan watched her go, his heart aching with pride and sorrow in equal measure. She was so small, too small to be changing diapers and fetching water and helping care for 3 babies, too small to have lost her mother, too small for any of this. He tried to sit up. The movement sent lightning through his leg, and he gasped, fell back. The wound had bled through Clara's bandaging during the night. Dark stains spread across the white cloth. From the other room came the sounds of Rebecca attempting to wrangle her brothers. The twins were awake and protesting loudly. Samuel started crying in sympathy. Ethan closed his eyes. This was impossible. He couldn't do this alone. He'd been fooling himself for 9 months, pretending he could be enough for these children. But he wasn't enough. He would never be enough. Hoofbeats. Ethan's eyes snapped open. He held his breath, listening. Multiple horses this time. 2, maybe 3. Coming fast up the path. Relief flooded through him so powerfully it was almost painful. She'd done it. Clara had brought help. The front door banged open without ceremony. Clara came through first, looking even more exhausted than she had last night, but triumphant. Behind her came a grizzled man in his 60s carrying a black medical bag. Doc Brennan. Ethan recognized him from town. And to Ethan's surprise, a third figure, Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, a stout woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and no-nonsense eyes. "Well," Mrs. Henderson announced, surveying the chaos of crying children and bloody bandages and general disaster, "you've certainly gotten yourself into a state, Mr. Cole." Clara went straight to the children while Doc Brennan approached the bed, already rolling up his sleeves. "Let's see the damage," the doctor said. He unwrapped Clara's bandaging with practiced efficiency, and Ethan saw him nod approvingly. "Good work on the drainage, clean cuts, proper depth. You probably saved his life, Miss Whitfield." "I only did what my father taught me," Clara called from across the room. She had Samuel in her arms and was directing Rebecca to help with the twins. Mrs. Henderson had already taken over the kitchen, firing up the stove, finding the cornmeal. Doc Brennan probed the wound, and Ethan hissed through his teeth. The doctor grunted. "Swelling's down significantly. No signs of gangrene, no streaking. You're a lucky man, Cole. Most rattler bites this bad. We're looking at amputation or worse." "How bad?" Ethan managed. "Bad enough. You're not walking on this for at least 2 weeks. Even then, you'll need a crutch for a month or more. And there's going to be permanent nerve damage. You'll likely have numbness, maybe some weakness in the calf. The doctor began cleaning the wound with something that burned like hellfire. But you'll keep the leg, and your life could be a lot worse. 2 weeks bedridden, a month on crutches. Ethan looked at his children, Rebecca trying to corral Matthew, Michael clinging to Clara's skirt, Samuel fussing in her arms, and felt panic rising in his chest. I can't, there's no one to... Already sorted, Mrs. Henderson called from the kitchen. She'd found eggs somewhere and was whisking them in a bowl. Miss Whitfield will be staying here to help with the children and the household. Ethan's gaze snapped to Clara. She met his eyes evenly, no hesitation, no doubt. Just until you're back on your feet, she said. Someone needs to keep these babies fed and cared for. It might as well be me. You're the school teacher. School starts in 3 weeks. Plenty of time. Clara bounced Samuel gently, soothing his cries. Besides, Mrs. Henderson has agreed to let me out of my contract at the boarding house. I'll stay here in exchange for room and board. It's practical. Practical. As if taking on 4 babies and an injured man in a falling-apart cabin was practical. As if uprooting her life for strangers was practical. But the relief that coursed through Ethan was too powerful to argue with. He nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Doc Brennan finished bandaging the wound with fresh dressings. I'll check back in 3 days. Keep it clean, keep it elevated. If you develop fever, chills, or if the swelling comes back, send for me immediately. He closed his bag with a decisive snap. Miss Whitfield, you did fine work. Your father taught you well. Clara's smile was sad. He was a good teacher. Mrs. Henderson had breakfast ready with astonishing speed, scrambled eggs, cornmeal mush, and fresh bread she'd brought from town. She fed the children first, spooning mush into eager mouths, wiping faces, maintaining order with the kind of firm kindness that came from years of managing boarding house residents. Ethan watched it all from the bed, feeling useless and grateful, and overwhelmed in equal measure. These women, strangers really, had swooped in and taken control of his collapsing life without being asked, without expecting anything in return. Well, that wasn't quite true. Clara was expecting room and board. But still. Doc Brennan left after breakfast, promising to return in 3 days and threatening dire consequences if Ethan so much as thought about standing up. Mrs. Henderson stayed long enough to help Clara organize the cabin, what little there was to organize, and to provide detailed instructions on caring for young children that Clara absorbed with focused attention. The twins need watching every second, Mrs. Henderson warned. They're into everything at this age, and the baby will need feeding every few hours. You'll get no sleep for a while. I'm used to little sleep, Clara said. Finally, in the early afternoon, Mrs. Henderson prepared to leave. She paused at the door, fixing Clara with a stern look. You're sure about this, girl? It's not too late to change your mind. You can still take the teaching position and room at my house. No one would think less of you. Clara glanced at the children, Rebecca showing her brothers how to stack wooden blocks, Samuel sleeping in the cradle, the twins investigating the contents of a low cupboard, and then at Ethan, still lying pale and weak on the bed. I'm sure, she said. Mrs. Henderson nodded. You're a good girl, Clara Whitfield. Your parents raised you right. She softened slightly. But don't let yourself be taken advantage of, you hear? Mr. Cole is an honorable man, but men can be thoughtless creatures when they're desperate. You make sure he appreciates what you're doing here. I will. After Mrs. Henderson left, the cabin fell into an almost eerie quiet. Just Clara and Ethan and 4 children looking at each other across the space, all of them suddenly aware that they were in this together now. That for better or worse, their lives had become entangled. Rebecca broke the silence. Are you going to be our new mama? Rebecca! Ethan was mortified. Miss Whitfield is here to help while I heal, that's all. But Clara knelt down to Rebecca's level, gentle and serious. I'm not here to replace your mama, sweetheart. No one could do that. But I can take care of you and your brothers for a while, if that's all right with you. Rebecca considered this gravely. Then she nodded. Okay, but you have to know the bedtime song, Mama's bedtime song. Will you teach it to me? Uh-huh. Then we have a deal. Clara offered her hand and Rebecca shook it solemnly. Watching them, Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been clenched tight since Margaret's death loosened just a fraction. He wasn't ready for hope, but maybe something like possibility. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Clara proved herself remarkably capable, managing the children with patience and good humor, finding her way around the kitchen despite its limitations, even venturing out to milk the cow, a task she admitted she'd never done before but figured out through trial and error and one very annoyed bovine. Ethan tried to help from the bed, calling out instructions, but mostly he just watched. Watched this stranger transform his household from barely controlled chaos into something that almost resembled order. Watched her sing to Samuel while she changed his diaper. Watched her referee disputes between the twins over who got which wooden spoon. Watched her braid Rebecca's tangled hair with careful fingers. By evening, he was exhausted just from watching. Clara made a simple supper, beans and salt pork and bread, and fed the children first, then brought Ethan a plate. She'd propped him up with pillows so he could eat sitting, and the food was plain but good, seasoned with something he couldn't identify. Some herb she'd found in the garden, maybe. "You're good at this," Ethan said. Clara smiled faintly. "I helped raise my younger cousins before." She trailed off. Before her parents died. Before everything changed. "I'm not unused to children. Still, this is more than you bargained for." "Life usually is." She settled into the rocking chair with her own plate, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as Ethan felt. Besides, I needed this. Needed to take on 4 babies and an invalid? Needed to be useful. Needed to matter. Clara stared into the fire, her eyes distant. "After my parents died, I sold everything. The house, the practice, all of it. I thought I wanted to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere with no memories. But the truth is, I was just running away. From grief, from responsibility, from everything that hurt." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. "You gave me something to run toward instead. Something that matters." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, how to tell her that she'd given him the same thing, a reason to believe he might survive this after all. So he said nothing, just nodded. And they ate in companionable silence while the children played and the fire crackled and the Wyoming night settled over the homestead like a blanket. Later, after the children were asleep, Rebecca in her small bed, the twins in their cradle, Samuel in the basket Clara had fashioned from folded quilts, she made herself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. "There's a spare room," Ethan offered. "Small, but it has a bed. Margaret used it for sewing. I'll be fine here. Closer to the children if they wake." "Clara." She paused in arranging her blankets, looked at him. "Thank you," Ethan said, "for all of this, for staying. I know it's not—" He struggled for words. "I know this isn't what you signed up for." Clara's smile was soft in the firelight. "Sometimes the best things aren't." She lay down, pulled the blanket over herself, and within minutes her breathing had evened into sleep. Ethan lay awake longer, his leg throbbing, his mind racing. Tomorrow he'd start figuring out how to manage the ranch from his bed, how to keep things running until he could walk again, how to make sure Clara didn't regret her decision to stay. But for tonight, for this one night, he let himself simply be grateful. Grateful for bread delivered at the right moment. Grateful for a woman who knew how to cut venom from a wound. Grateful for the sound of children sleeping safe and someone else keeping watch. Outside, the coyotes sang again. But this time, Ethan didn't hear them as a threat. Just as another sound in the vast Wyoming night, no more dangerous than the wind or the creek or the rustling of grass. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. And for the first time in 9 months, he didn't dream of Margaret dying. He dreamed of mourning. The first 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and oddly natural. Clara woke before dawn each morning to the sound of Samuel's hungry cries, and by the time pale light crept through the windows, she already had the fire stoked, coffee brewing, and the baby changed and content. Ethan would wake to find her moving quietly through the cabin, her hair loose down her back, humming those tuneless melodies that seemed to soothe the children even when words failed. She never complained. Not about the endless diapers or the twins' tendency to dump their breakfast on the floor, or Rebecca's questions that came rapid fire from the moment she opened her eyes until the moment she finally surrendered to sleep. Not about the cramped quarters or the leaking roof or the mice that skittered through the walls at night. But Ethan saw the exhaustion settling into her bones, saw the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching, saw her slip outside after the children were asleep and stand alone in the darkness, shoulders shaking with silent tears she wouldn't let anyone witness. On the third evening, after she'd gotten all four children down and sat slumped in the rocking chair looking half dead herself, Ethan finally spoke what had been building in his chest. "You need rest." Clara's eyes opened slowly. "I'm fine." "You're not. You haven't slept more than a few hours at a time since you got here." "Neither have you." "I'm lying in bed all day. You're running yourself into the ground." Ethan shifted, trying to ease the constant ache in his leg. "Tomorrow when Doc Brennan comes, I'm going to ask him to send someone from town, a hired girl to help." "With what money?" Claire's voice was gentle but pointed. "Ethan, I've seen your ledgers. I had to find the coffee tin to make breakfast that first morning." She didn't say the rest, that the coffee tin had contained exactly 14 cents and a button, that the root cellar was nearly empty, that the fence post needed replacing and the roof needed patching and the chicken coop was falling apart. Heat crept up Ethan's neck. "I've got credit at the general store." "Which you're already extended on." Claire leaned forward, elbows on her knees. "I'm not criticizing. I know you've been doing everything you can, but hiring help costs money you don't have. I'm already here. I'm already helping. Let it be enough." "It's not fair to you." "Life isn't fair." The words came out sharp, and Clara closed her eyes, took a breath. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I'm sorry. I just meant, I'm here by choice, Ethan. My choice. You don't owe me fairness. You don't owe me anything." But he did? He owed her everything, his life, his children's well-being, the fragile hope that maybe they'd all survive this summer after all. Before he could figure out how to say any of that, Rebecca appeared in the doorway to the bedroom, rag doll clutched to her chest, lower lip trembling. "I had a bad dream." Clara was up instantly, crossing to scoop the little girl into her arms. "Come here, sweetheart. Tell me about it." "There was a big snake and it eated Papa and you went away and we were all alone and—" Rebecca dissolved into tears against Clara's shoulder. Clara carried her to the rocking chair, settled them both in it, began the gentle rocking motion. "Shh, I've got you. It was just a dream, just a dream. Your Papa is right there, see? Safe in his bed, and I'm not going anywhere. Promise?" "I promise." "Mama promised too." Rebecca's voice was muffled, barely audible. She promised she'd get better, but she didn't. Clara's eyes met Ethan's across the dim room. The pain in them was raw, unguarded. She knew what it meant to have promises broken by death, knew exactly what this child was feeling. "You're right," Clara said quietly. "Your mama wanted to keep that promise more than anything. But sometimes people get sick, and even when they fight as hard as they can, their bodies give out. That wasn't your mama's fault. And it wasn't because she didn't love you enough." "Did she love me?" "Oh, sweetheart," Clara's voice cracked. "She loved you more than the sky is wide, more than the grass is long, more than there are stars in heaven. Your Papa has told me so much about her, and I can hear it in every word, how much she loved all of you." Ethan's throat closed. He had said almost nothing about Margaret to Clara. A few bare facts, maybe. But Clara was giving Rebecca what she needed to hear, truth woven with gentleness. And maybe that was worth more than strict accuracy. "I don't remember her face anymore," Rebecca whispered. "I try, but I can't see it." Clara looked to Ethan, a silent question. He nodded toward the trunk in the corner. She understood immediately. Still holding Rebecca, she crossed to the trunk and opened it one-handed. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was the daguerreotype from their wedding day. Margaret in her mother's dress, Ethan stiff and uncomfortable in his one good suit, both of them young and hopeful and completely unprepared for what lay ahead. Clara brought it back to the rocking chair, angled it so Rebecca could see in the firelight. "That's your mama," Ethan said, his voice rough. "That's Margaret. You have her eyes, same shape, same color, and when you smile, really smile, you look just like her." Rebecca traced her small fingers over the glass, reverent. "She's pretty." "She was beautiful," Clara agreed. "Inside and out, I'd wager." They sat like that for a long while, Rebecca studying the photograph, Clara rocking slowly, Ethan watching from the bed and trying not to let them see the tears tracking down his face. Finally, Rebecca's eyes began to droop. Clara set the daguerreotype carefully aside and carried the child back to bed, tucking her in with the rag doll and a whispered good night. When she returned to the main room, she found Ethan had managed to sit up, legs over the side of the bed, his injured leg braced carefully. "What are you doing?" Clara asked, alarmed. Doc Brennan said, "I know what he said, but I can't stay flat on my back forever." Ethan gritted his teeth against the pain. "I need to start putting weight on it, testing it." "Not yet. It's only been 3 days. Clara, I've got a ranch to run, cattle to check, fences to mend. I can't afford to be laid up for 2 weeks." "You can't afford not to be." She crossed her arms, and Ethan recognized the stubborn set of her jaw. "If you push too hard too fast, you'll tear something. Make it worse. Then you'll be down for a month instead of 2 weeks. Is that what you want?" It wasn't, but lying here while everything fell apart around him was driving him mad. "At least let me help you outside," Clara said, her tone softening. "Fresh air would do you good. We can get you to the porch, let you sit in the sun for a while. Would that help?" It would. Even just the thought of something other than these 4 walls made Ethan's chest loosen slightly. He nodded. Getting him upright was an ordeal that involved a great deal of cursing under his breath, Clara's surprising strength, and a crutch fashioned from an old fence post that Doc Brennan had left. By the time they made it to the porch, Ethan was sweating and breathless, and his leg felt like someone was driving hot nails through the bone. But the evening air was sweet with the smell of sage and distant pine. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold, and for the first time in days, Ethan could see his land spread out before him, the pastures, the creek winding through the valley, the mountains rising purple in the distance. Clara helped him into the old chair Margaret used to favor, then stood beside him, following his gaze. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "It's hard." Ethan's voice was flat, unforgiving. "It takes everything you have and demands more." "But you love it." He wanted to deny it, but she was right. Despite everything, the killing work, the isolation, the way this land had taken his wife and nearly taken him, he loved it. Loved the stark beauty, the endless sky, the feeling of building something with his own hands. Margaret hated it at first, Ethan said. She was from Ohio, green country, gentle country. When I brought her here, she cried for a month, said it was too empty, too wild. He smiled slightly at the memory. But eventually she came to see what I saw, the strength of it, the honesty. This land doesn't lie to you, doesn't pretend to be something it's not. What changed her mind? Rebecca. Ethan watched a hawk circle overhead, hunting in the twilight. Margaret was pregnant when we arrived. When Rebecca was born, something shifted. She'd stand on this porch with the baby in her arms and say, "This is her inheritance, this wildness, this freedom." She wanted Rebecca to grow up strong, wanted all our children to know they could survive anything. Clara was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was remarkable." She was. Ethan turned to look at her. "You would have liked each other, I think. You're both—" He struggled for the word. "Capable. That's what Margaret was. Capable. Nothing broke her. Until the fever. The fever would have broken anyone. It didn't break you. When you lost your parents." Clara's laugh was bitter. "You don't know that. You didn't see me after. I broke Ethan, completely. I sold their home, their belongings, everything they'd built. I ran as far and as fast as I could. That's not strength. That's cowardice. That's survival. There's a difference." She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Or understanding. They were both survivors of loss, both still figuring out how to keep breathing when the people they'd loved most were gone. From inside the cabin came the sound of crying. Michael, by the pitch. Clara sighed. "I should go. I'll be fine here for a while." She hesitated, then nodded and went inside. Through the open door, Ethan could hear her soothing voice, the crying gradually subsiding. The domesticity of it struck him suddenly. This woman caring for his children, moving through his home, filling the spaces Margaret had left empty. It should have felt wrong, like a betrayal. Instead, it just felt necessary. Doc Brennan arrived the next morning with Mrs. Henderson in tow again, both of them full of opinions about Ethan's progress and Clara's competence. The doctor changed the dressing, pronounced the wound healing well, and revised his estimate. 10 days, he announced. Maybe less if you're careful. The swelling's down significantly, no infection, no necrosis. You're a lucky man, Cole. So I keep hearing. Mrs. Henderson had brought supplies from town: flour, sugar, coffee, salt pork, dried beans. She set them on the kitchen table with pointed deliberation. Donated, she said when Ethan tried to protest. From folks in town. They heard about your situation and wanted to help. Charity. It burned in Ethan's gut. He'd never taken charity in his life, had always made his own way. But with 4 children depending on him and barely $1 to his name, pride was a luxury he couldn't afford. Tell them thank you, he managed. Tell them yourself when you're back on your feet. Mrs. Henderson surveyed the cabin with her sharp eyes, noting everything Clara had accomplished: the clean floors, the organized shelves, the children's clothes washed and hanging on the line outside. Miss Whitfield, you're performing miracles here. Hardly miracles, just ordinary housekeeping. There's nothing ordinary about managing 4 children under 3 while nursing an invalid. Mrs. Henderson pulled Clara aside, lowering her voice, but Ethan could still hear. How are you holding up, girl? Truly? I'm fine. You look exhausted. Are you eating enough? Sleeping? When I can. That's not sufficient. Mrs. Henderson's voice took on the tone of someone used to being obeyed. You're no good to these children if you collapse. I'm sending Mary Brennan over, the doctor's niece. She's 15 and capable. She can help with the children for a few hours each day so you can rest. Mrs. Henderson, I don't need... It's not a suggestion. The older woman's expression softened slightly. Clara, you're doing a wonderful thing here, but even the strongest horse needs to be unburdened sometimes. Let someone help you, please. Clara glanced toward Ethan, who nodded. She sighed. All right, thank you. Mary Brennan arrived that afternoon, a cheerful girl with red braids and freckles across her nose. She took to the twins immediately, chasing them around the cabin and making them shriek with laughter while Clara finally rested. She slept for 3 hours straight in the small sewing room, and when she woke her eyes were clearer, her movements less fragile. The routine shifted again. Mary came each afternoon, giving Clara time to sleep or bathe or simply sit in silence. The children adjusted quickly, accepting this new presence with the easy resilience of the very young. Rebecca appointed herself Mary's assistant, showing her where things were kept and explaining the twins' various quirks with endearing seriousness. Ethan's leg continued to improve. By the 7th day, he could stand without the crutch for short periods. By the 9th, he could walk from the cabin to the barn, though the effort left him shaking and nauseated. Doc Brennan cleared him for light work on the 10th day with strict instructions not to overdo it. Light work. As if there was such a thing on a ranch. But Ethan tried. He checked the cattle, riding slowly on his gentlest horse with his bad leg carefully positioned. He mended the chicken coop with Rebecca, handing him nails and chattering about everything Clara had taught her. He fixed the worst of the roof leaks, though climbing the ladder made his legs scream in protest. And he watched Clara, watched her transform from the exhausted stranger who'd arrived bearing bread into someone integral to their survival. Watched her learn his children's rhythms, their needs, their fears. Watched her sing Rebecca to sleep and wrestle the twins into clean clothes and pace the floor with Samuel at midnight when he wouldn't settle. Watched her belong here in a way he hadn't expected and couldn't quite name. 2 weeks after the snake bite, Ethan was checking the south fence line when he spotted a rider approaching from town. As the figure drew closer, he recognized the dark suit and severe expression of Reverend Thomas from the church in Sweetwater Springs. Ethan's stomach sank. The Reverend wasn't known for social calls. Mr. Cole, the Reverend dismounted, his face grim. We need to talk about your situation. My situation? Miss Whitfield, living here, unmarried, unchaperoned. The Reverend's tone left no doubt about his feelings on the matter. It's causing talk in town. Talk. Ethan kept his voice level. Miss Whitfield is helping care for my children while I recover from injury. There's nothing improper about it. Isn't there? A young, unmarried woman living alone with a widower, sharing his home, his bed for all anyone knows? Now you wait, I'm not making accusations, Mr. Cole. I'm telling you what others are saying, and it's not just gossip. It's affecting Miss Whitfield's reputation, her ability to take up the teaching position when school starts. Ethan felt ice forming in his veins. What are you saying? The school board met yesterday. There are concerns about Miss Whitfield's moral character, about whether she's a suitable influence for the town's children. The Reverend's expression was almost sympathetic. If the current arrangement continues, they may have to withdraw the teaching offer. That's insane. She saved my life. She's caring for 4 babies who would otherwise have no one. How is that grounds for... The appearance of impropriety is often as damaging as actual sin. The Reverend sighed. I don't personally agree with this, Mr. Cole, but I'm trying to help. To warn you before things go too far. What do you suggest? That I send her away? Let my children suffer so narrow-minded gossips can feel righteous? I suggest you make the situation legitimate. Marry her. The words hung in the air between them, stark and shocking. Marry her, Ethan repeated slowly. It would solve everything. Give Miss Whitfield protection, respectability. Give your children a mother. Give you help you desperately need. The Reverend's voice gentled. I'm not suggesting you love her, Mr. Cole. This would be a practical arrangement, but it would silence the talk and protect both of you. After the Reverend left, Ethan stood alone in the pasture for a long time, his mind churning. Marry Clara. It was absurd. They barely knew each other. She was Margaret's opposite in every way, educated, refined, from a world of books and medicine and civilization. She'd never intended to stay here permanently, had only meant to help until he recovered. But the Reverend was right about one thing. The talk would destroy her, would cost her the teaching position, would follow her wherever she went in this territory. Frontier towns had long memories for scandal, and he needed her. Not just for the children, though they'd come to depend on her completely, but for himself. For the way she made the cabin feel less empty, for her competence and quiet strength, for the moments when their eyes met across the room and he felt less alone than he had in months. He couldn't marry her. It would be taking advantage of her kindness, trapping her in a life she'd never chosen. But he couldn't let her be destroyed by helping him either. When Ethan returned to the cabin, Clara was kneading bread at the kitchen table while the children napped. She looked up at his expression and stilled. What's wrong? He told her. All of it. The Reverend's visit, the school board's concerns, the threat to her reputation and livelihood. Clara's face went pale, then flushed, then settled into a careful blankness that was somehow worse than any emotional display. I see, she said quietly. I'm sorry. This is my fault. I should have thought about how it would look, should have insisted you stay in town. It's not your fault, and I wouldn't have stayed in town regardless. Clara returned to kneading with deliberate focus. I made my choice with full knowledge of the potential consequences. But the teaching position was never guaranteed. Frontier towns are fickle about who they trust with their children. Her hand stilled on the dough. I've seen this before. A woman helps a man, even innocently, and suddenly she's suspect. It doesn't matter what actually happened, only what people imagine might have happened. Ethan moved closer, wishing his leg didn't make him limp, wishing he had something useful to offer. The Reverend suggested a solution. Clara's laugh was sharp. Let me guess. Marriage. Yes. Of course he did. Because a woman's respectability can only be secured by attaching her to a man. Her own character, her own choices, her own worth, none of that matters. She slapped the dough down harder than necessary. I'm sorry. I'm not angry at you. I'm just... She stopped, took a breath. Tired. I'm tired of a world where I can't even help someone without it being turned into something shameful. So you'd refuse? Even if it meant losing everything? Clara met his eyes. Would you accept? Even if it meant being trapped with a stranger? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Ethan pulled out a chair, sat heavily. His leg was throbbing from the day's work. I don't know what the right answer is, but I know I can't let you suffer for helping me. If marriage is what it takes to protect you, then don't. Clara's voice was sharp. Don't propose marriage as some noble sacrifice. I've had quite enough of men making decisions about my life for my own good. Then what do you want? She was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on the dough, her eyes distant. I want what I can't have. I want my parents back. I want a world where a woman can make her own choices without being punished for them. I want, her voice broke. I want to matter to someone in a way that doesn't require me to disappear into someone else's life. You matter to my children. You've seen how they light up when you walk in the room, how Rebecca asks for you when she's scared, how the twins reach for you before they reach for me. I know, and that's, Clara wiped her eyes roughly, that's why this is so hard. Because I do love them. I love being needed by them. But is that enough reason to marry someone I barely know, to tie my entire future to this place? Ethan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that people had married for less. The frontier marriages were often born of necessity rather than affection, that love could grow from shared purpose if given time. But he'd had love once, real, deep, complicated love with Margaret, and he knew the difference between that and mere convenience. No, he said finally, it's not enough. You deserve better than settling. Claire's smile was sad. So do you. They sat in silence as the afternoon light slanted through the windows and the bread dough rose between them, stubborn and patient and impossible to rush. Finally, Rebecca appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and the moment passed. Clara pulled herself together, smiled at the little girl, and asked if she wanted to help punch down the dough. Rebecca scrambled up onto a chair, delighted, and the cabin filled with her chatter and laughter. But Ethan saw the way Clara's hands trembled slightly, saw the shadow behind her smile. And he knew that no matter what they decided, someone was going to get hurt. The question was just how badly, and whether any of them could survive it. That evening, after the children were asleep and the dishes washed and put away, Clara stood at the window staring out into the darkness. Ethan could see her reflection in the glass, pale and ghostly, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold despite the summer heat that still radiated from the walls. I'll leave, she said quietly. Tomorrow, before the talk gets worse. And go where? Ethan asked from his chair. His leg was propped up, still aching from the day's work. Back to Mrs. Henderson's, where everyone in town will whisper when you walk by. I'll go somewhere else. Another town. Another territory. Running again. Claire turned to face him, her eyes flashing. What else would you have me do? Stay and watch my reputation burn? Watch the school board withdraw their offer? Become the cautionary tale mothers tell their daughters? I'd have you fight. Fight how? With what weapons? I have no power here, Ethan. No family, no money, no standing. I'm just a woman who made the mistake of being kind to a stranger. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the protest from his leg. You saved my life. You kept my children fed and safe and loved when I couldn't. If that's a mistake, then the world is more broken than I thought. The world is exactly that broken. Haven't you noticed? Clara's voice was brittle, close to breaking. Your wife died because a fever took her, and there was nothing anyone could do. My parents died the same way. Children die from scarlet fever and whooping cough and accidents that could have been prevented. Women die in childbirth. Men die from snake bites that happen because they were just trying to fix their damn porch. Her breath hitched. And somehow, in all that tragedy and loss and unfairness, the thing people choose to care about is whether an unmarried woman spent too much time alone with a widower. That's what matters to them, not life or death, not kindness or courage, just appearance, just propriety. The bitterness in her words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on his own grief, his own struggles, that he hadn't fully considered what she'd lost. She'd buried both parents, sold everything she'd known, traveled halfway across a continent to start over. And now she was about to lose even this fragile new beginning because small-minded people couldn't see past their own narrow judgment. Then marry me, Ethan said. Clara stared at him. What? Not because the Reverend said so, not because of the gossip. He took a step toward her, then another, closing the distance between them. Marry me because it's practical, because you need protection and I need help, because those children in there need someone who loves them the way you do. That's not a reason to marry someone. It's a better reason than most people have. Ethan kept his voice steady, reasonable, even though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Frontier marriage built on less. You'd have security, a home, a purpose. I'd have help with the children and the ranch. We'd both have companionship, partnership. Without love. Without the illusion of love, Ethan corrected. But with honesty, with respect, with shared purpose. He paused. I loved Margaret, loved her more than I knew how to say. And I'm not offering you that because I don't have it to give anymore. But I can offer you safety, stability, a life that matters. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're asking me to give up any chance at something more, at real affection, at being chosen for myself and not just for what I can provide. I'm asking you to choose yourself, to choose survival and dignity and a future. Ethan reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the evening. If you leave tomorrow, where does that lead? Another town where no one knows you, another job if you can find one, another set of strangers to navigate, and always alone, always looking over your shoulder for the next disaster. And if I stay? If I marry you? Clara's voice was barely a whisper. What then? I become a wife to a man who doesn't love me, a mother to children who aren't mine, trapped in a life I never imagined. Or you become a partner to someone who values you, a mother to children who already adore you, rooted in a place where you're needed. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. I can't promise you passion or romance, but I can promise you honesty. I can promise you'll never have to wonder where you stand or whether you matter. You'll matter every single day. To me, to them, to this place we're trying to build. Clara pulled her hand free and turned back to the window. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken fears and fragile hopes. Outside, night insects sang their endless chorus. A coyote called from somewhere distant, lonely and wild. My father used to say that life is about choosing which hardships you can live with, Clara said finally. He said every path has its thorns. The question is which thorns you're willing to bleed for. Wise man. He was. Clara's reflection in the glass showed her wiping her eyes. He also said that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help when it's offered, even if it costs you pride, even if it changes everything you thought you wanted. Ethan waited. His leg was screaming at him to sit down, but he stayed standing, stayed still, letting her work through whatever battle was raging in her mind. If I agreed, Clara said slowly, there would have to be conditions. All right. This would be a partnership, equal. I'm not some hired girl you can order around or dismiss when you're tired of me. Agreed. I get a say in decisions about the children, about the ranch, about our lives. Of course. And if it doesn't work, if we find we can't stand each other, or if circumstances change, we revisit the arrangement. No one stays trapped out of obligation. Ethan hesitated. That last condition cut both ways, and he knew it. It meant she could leave. Meant this fragile stability they were building could collapse at any moment if she decided she'd had enough. But it also meant she'd be choosing to stay, every day. Not because vows or law compelled her, but because she wanted to. Agreed, he said. Clara turned from the window to face him fully. In the lamplight, she looked impossibly young and impossibly old at the same time. Then yes, I'll marry you. The words should have brought relief. Instead, Ethan felt only a strange mixture of victory and loss. He was getting what he needed, help, stability, a mother for his children, but he was also binding this woman to a life she'd never chosen, to a man who couldn't give her everything she deserved. We'll do it soon, Ethan said, before the school board makes their decision official, before the talk spreads any further. How soon? This Sunday. The Reverend owes me that much after coming out here to lecture us about propriety. Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. I should write to my aunt back east, let her know. You have family? My mother's sister. We were never close, but she's the only family I have left. Clara's smile was sad. She'll probably think I've lost my mind. Marrying a stranger on the frontier after knowing him less than a month. Have you? Lost my mind, Clara considered. Probably, but then again, sanity seems overrated these days. A small sound from the bedroom made them both turn. Rebecca stood in the doorway, rag doll dragging on the floor behind her, eyes wide and solemn. "Are you fighting?" the little girl asked. "No, sweetheart," Clara said quickly, crossing to kneel before her. "We're just talking. Grown-up talk. Nothing for you to worry about." "Mama and Papa used to fight sometimes, late at night. They thought I was sleeping, but I heard them." Ethan's chest tightened. He and Margaret had argued, of course they had, about money and decisions and the 100 small frictions of building a life together, but he thought they'd been quiet enough, careful enough, that the children never knew. "All married people disagree sometimes," Clara said gently. "It doesn't mean they don't love each other. It just means they're figuring things out together." "Are you and Papa getting married?" Clara glanced at Ethan, a question in her eyes. He nodded. "Better to tell her now. Let her get used to the idea." "Yes," Clara said. "We are. This Sunday. Is that all right with you?" Rebecca's face scrunched up in thought. "Will you be my new mama?" "I'll be your papa's wife, and I'll take care of you and your brothers, but no one can replace your real mama. No one should try." "But can I call you mama anyway, if I want to?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "If you want to, sweet girl, that would be, yes. You can call me whatever feels right to you." Rebecca seemed satisfied with this answer. She yawned hugely. "Okay, I'm going back to bed now." "Good idea. Come on, I'll tuck you in." After Clara disappeared into the bedroom with Rebecca, Ethan sank back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. In the space of an evening, his entire future had shifted. In 4 days, he'd be married again. To a woman he barely knew, a woman who was agreeing out of necessity rather than desire. Margaret would have had opinions about this. Strong ones. She'd probably have boxed his ears for being so practical about something as important as marriage. She'd believed in love, in waiting for the right person, in building something real rather than settling for something functional. But Margaret was gone, and the luxury of waiting for love was something Ethan couldn't afford anymore. Clara returned, moving to bank the fire for the night. She went right back to sleep. I think the idea of a wedding excites her more than it frightens her. Children are resilient. They are. Sometimes more than adults. Clara straightened, brushed soot from her hands. "I should sleep. Tomorrow will be busy if we're preparing for a wedding in 4 days. "Clara." She paused, waiting. "Thank you," Ethan said, "for agreeing, for staying, for all of it." "Don't thank me yet. You might regret this." "I doubt that." Clara's smile was faint and uncertain. "Ask me again in a year." She retired to her pallet by the fire, and Ethan made his slow, painful way to the bed. Sleep was a long time coming. He lay in the darkness, listening to Clara's breathing even out, listening to the children's soft sounds in the next room, and tried to imagine what his life would look like a week from now. A month? A year? Married again. Father to 4. Bound to a woman who was still fundamentally a stranger despite all they'd been through together. It should have terrified him. Instead, he felt only a curious calm. As if some decision he'd been wrestling with for months had finally been made for him, the weight of it lifted from his shoulders. He slept better that night than he had in weeks. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation. Clara cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, scrubbing floors and washing windows and beating rugs with an intensity that suggested she was trying to work out her nerves through physical labor. Ethan rode to town despite his still healing leg, ordered supplies from the general store on credit he didn't have, and informed a startled Mrs. Henderson of the upcoming wedding. The older woman's reaction was complicated. Relief that the situation was being made proper, concern about the rushed nature of the whole thing, and a sharp-eyed assessment of both Ethan and Clara that made him feel like a schoolboy being evaluated for character. "You're both adults," Mrs. Henderson said finally. "You're both going into this with your eyes open. That's more than most couples can say." She paused. "But Ethan, you treat that girl right. She's been through enough loss. Don't add to it." "I won't." "See that you don't." Word spread through Sweetwater Springs with the speed of wildfire. By the time Ethan returned to the ranch, half the town knew about the wedding. Some reactions were supportive, neighbors offering to bring food for a small reception, the seamstress offering to let out one of her own dresses for Clara to wear. Others were less kind. Ethan overheard whispered speculation at the general store, comments about unseemly haste and questionable circumstances that made his hands curl into fists. He said nothing. Let them talk. Once Clara was his wife, the gossip would die down. It always did. Mary Brennan proved invaluable during the preparations, taking the children for hours at a time so Clara could focus on the details. A dress borrowed from Mrs. Henderson and altered to fit Clara's smaller frame. Wildflowers gathered from the meadow for the ceremony. A wedding supper planned from their meager supplies, supplemented by donations from generous neighbors. Ethan found himself watching Clara during those days with growing awareness. The way she moved through tasks with quiet efficiency. The way she spoke to the children with patience that never seemed to fray even when they were at their most difficult. The way she'd catch him looking and offer a small, uncertain smile before turning back to whatever she was doing. She was beautiful in an understated way he hadn't fully noticed before. Not showy like some of the women in town with their elaborate hairstyles and fashionable dresses, but graceful, self-contained, real. On Saturday evening, the night before the wedding, Ethan found her outside after the children were in bed. She stood in her usual spot, staring out at the mountains, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders against the cooling air. "Second thoughts?" he asked, joining her. "10th thoughts, more like." Clara didn't look at him. "100th, maybe. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. And I keep coming back to the fact that most of those ways aren't any worse than what I'd face if I left." She finally turned to him. "That's a terrible reason to marry someone, isn't it? Because it's the least bad option?" "I don't know. Is it a terrible reason to build a ranch on land that fights you every step of the way? To have children in a place where illness and injury are always one mistake away? To keep going when everything you planned for falls apart?" Ethan shook his head. Sometimes the least bad option is still worth choosing, especially if you commit to making it the best you can. And if we fail? If we make each other miserable? Then we'll be miserable together instead of miserable apart. At least there's company in that. Clara laughed, short and sharp. "You have a strange way of being reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest." Ethan reached for her hand, held it loosely enough that she could pull away if she wanted. She didn't. "Tomorrow we're making promises to each other. I want you to know that I'll keep mine. I'll treat you with respect. I'll value your opinions. I'll make sure you always have a place here for as long as you want it. That's what I can offer. It might not be romance or passion, but it's real." "Real," Clara repeated softly. "That's more than I expected to find when I came west." They stood like that in the twilight, hands linked, not speaking. The ranch spread out around them, full of work that would never truly be finished, full of challenges they'd face together or not at all. In the distance, Ethan's cattle lowed. Closer, a horse stamped in the corral. The sounds of his life, soon to become their life. "I'm afraid," Clara admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of wanting more than this. Of expecting more than you can give." She looked down at their joined hands. "Of falling in love with your children and then having to leave them if this doesn't work. Of staying so long I forget how to imagine any other life." "Those are reasonable fears." But fear is just fear. It doesn't tell you what's right or wrong, only what's risky." Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "Margaret used to say that anything worth having is worth being afraid of losing. She said if you're not scared, you're not alive, you're just existing." She sounds like she was very wise. She was, about most things. Ethan paused. "She'd like you, I think. She'd appreciate your competence, your strength, the way you don't back down from hard things." Clara's eyes were bright with tears again. "Do you think she'd approve of this marriage?" Ethan considered the question honestly. Would Margaret approve of him marrying a near stranger out of necessity? Of bringing another woman into her home, her life, her children's hearts? "I think she'd want her children cared for," he said finally. "I think she'd want them to have a mother who loves them. And I think she'd understand that life doesn't always give us the luxury of waiting for perfect circumstances." He met Clara's eyes. "But honestly, I don't know. And maybe that's all right. Maybe we don't need her approval. Maybe we just need to do the best we can with what we have." That's a very practical view of marriage. It's a very practical marriage. Clara pulled her hand free, but gently, without anger. I should go in. Big day tomorrow. I need whatever sleep I can get. Clara, she paused. I'm grateful, Ethan said, for your yes, for your willingness to take this risk. I know it's not what you wanted when you came here. No, Clara agreed. It's not what I wanted, but maybe it's what I needed. She offered him a small smile. Good night, Ethan. Good night. He watched her go inside, watched the lamplight glow warm through the windows, watched the silhouette of her moving through the cabin that would soon be fully hers. Tomorrow, she'd be his wife. They'd stand before the Reverend and the town and make promises that would bind their futures together. And Ethan found that the prospect didn't frighten him as much as he'd expected. There was nervousness, yes, uncertainty, but also something that felt almost like hope. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe this was what they both needed, even if neither of them had known to want it. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Wyoming morning that made you forget about the harsh winters and brutal summers and endless work. Ethan woke early, his stomach churning with nerves he hadn't felt since his first wedding day 12 years ago. He washed and shaved carefully, cut himself twice due to shaking hands, dressed in his only good suit that smelled of mothballs and memories. Claire had already taken the children to Mrs. Henderson's to get ready. The cabin felt empty without them, too quiet, full of spaces that echoed. Ethan stood in the main room and tried to remember what Margaret had looked like on their wedding day. The details were fuzzy now, worn smooth by time and grief. He remembered she'd been happy, nervous but happy. They both had been, young and stupid and full of dreams about the life they'd build together. This wedding would be different. No dreams of romance or adventure. Just two practical people making a practical choice for practical reasons. It should have felt hollow. Instead, it felt solid, real, like building a house on bedrock rather than sand. The ceremony was set for 11 o'clock at the church in town. Ethan arrived early, his leg protesting the ride but manageable. A surprising number of people had gathered, neighbors he barely knew, townspeople he'd never spoken to, all dressed in their Sunday best and looking at him with expressions ranging from curious to judgmental to genuinely happy. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself. The church was decorated with wildflowers and ribbons, simple but lovely. Someone had baked a cake. There were tables set up outside for the reception, already laden with food people had brought. Ethan stood at the front of the church, trying not to fidget, trying not to think about the last time he'd stood in this exact spot. At Margaret's funeral, hollow and broken, barely able to comprehend that she was gone. The Reverend appeared at his elbow. Ready? As I'll ever be. Miss Whitfield is a fine woman. You're lucky to have found her. I know. Treat her well, Ethan. She's sacrificing a great deal to make this work. I know that too. The Reverend nodded and took his place. Someone started playing the organ. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, her fingers dancing over the keys with surprising grace. The small congregation stood and turned toward the back of the church, and there was Clara. She stood in the doorway with Mrs. Henderson at her side, wearing a dress of pale blue that brought out the gray-green of her eyes. Her hair was arranged in a simple style, loose curls pinned back from her face. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, Indian paintbrush and lupine and white yarrow. She looked terrified and determined and heartbreakingly beautiful. Their eyes met across the length of the church. Ethan tried to offer a reassuring smile. Clara's lips twitched in something that might have been an answering smile or might have been suppressed panic. Then Mrs. Henderson patted her arm, and Clara began the long walk down the aisle. Ethan watched her come, this woman who was about to become his wife, and felt the weight of what they were doing settle over him. This wasn't just a convenience. This wasn't just solving a problem. This was a promise, a commitment, a choice they were both making to tie their lives together for better or worse. Claire reached him, and Mrs. Henderson stepped back. They stood facing each other, the Reverend between them, and Ethan could see his own nervousness reflected in Clara's eyes. Dearly beloved, the Reverend began, and the familiar words washed over them, binding them together with vows as old as time and as fragile as hope. Ethan spoke his promises clearly, meaning every word even if they weren't spoken with the passion he'd felt 12 years ago. Claire's voice wavered only slightly as she made hers. They exchanged simple gold bands that Ethan had purchased on credit from the jeweler in town. And when the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, when Ethan kissed Claire's cheek in a chaste brush of lips that made her blush, it felt both utterly surreal and completely inevitable. They were married. The reception passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes, of cake that was too sweet and punch that was too warm, of neighbors slapping Ethan on the back and women clustering around Clara with advice and opinion she accepted with polite grace. The children were returned to them, Rebecca resplendent in a new dress someone had gifted her, the twins confused but excited by all the attention. Samuel passed from arm to arm among the women who cooed over him. Through it all, Ethan watched his new wife navigate the social requirements of a frontier wedding with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. She smiled at the right moments, thanked people graciously, deflected invasive questions with practiced ease. Only someone looking closely would see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was watching. Finally, mercifully, it was over. They loaded the children into the wagon, accepted final congratulations and farewells, and headed back to the ranch as the afternoon sun angled toward evening. The ride was quiet. Rebecca chattered about the wedding and the cake and all the people, but Clara and Ethan said little. What was there to say? They'd done it, made it official. There was no going back now. When they reached the ranch, Ethan helped Clara down from the wagon while she held Samuel. Their hands touched, and she startled slightly, as if surprised to find him real. He steadied her, making sure she had her balance before releasing her. "Well," Clara said softly, "here we are." "Here we are," Ethan echoed. They stood in the yard of the ranch that was now fully hers, looking at the cabin that would shelter them both, surrounded by children who were now legally her responsibility as much as his. The sun painted everything gold and warm, promising beauty while hiding all the hard edges that would be revealed in the harsh light of morning. "Mrs. Cole," Ethan said, testing out the name. Clara's smile was faint and fragile. "That's going to take some getting used to. We have time." "Do we? Time seems to move strangely out here, too fast and too slow all at once." She was right. It had been less than 3 weeks since the snake bite. Less than 3 weeks since she'd arrived with a loaf of bread and changed everything. And yet it felt like a lifetime. Like she'd always been here, always been part of the fabric of his days. Rebecca tugged on Clara's skirt. "Mama Clara, can we have cake for supper?" Clara looked to Ethan, questioning. He shrugged, suddenly too tired to care about proper meals and schedules. "Why not?" Clara said. "It's a special day. We can have cake." The children cheered. Clara carried Samuel inside, Rebecca and the twins trailing after her like ducklings following their mother. Ethan stood alone in the yard for a moment longer, looking at his land, his home, his life that had shifted so completely in such a short time. He thought about Margaret, buried on the hillside. Wondered what she'd think of all this. Wondered if she'd understand the choice he'd made, the necessity of it, the strange hope hidden at its center. Then he squared his shoulders and went inside to join his family, this new, unexpected, cobbled-together family that was his now, for better or worse, in all the complicated ways that mattered. The first week of marriage was an exercise in careful navigation. Clara moved her few belongings into the small sewing room, claiming it as her own space despite Ethan's half-hearted protest that married couples typically shared a bedroom. She'd looked at him with those clear gray-green eyes and said simply, "We agreed this was a partnership of convenience. Let's not pretend otherwise." He hadn't argued. The truth was, he was relieved. Sharing a bed with a stranger, even a stranger he'd married, felt like a betrayal of Margaret's memory that he wasn't ready for. Maybe wouldn't ever be ready for. So they established their separate territories within the small cabin. Clara's room, Ethan's room, the shared spaces where they orbited each other like planets following predictable paths, careful not to collide. The children noticed nothing amiss. To them, Clara was simply Mama Clara now, the woman who fed them and cleaned their scrapes and sang them to sleep. Rebecca had taken to calling her just Mama within 2 days of the wedding, and though Ethan saw Clara's eyes fill with tears the first time, she'd smiled and accepted the title with grace. The ranch work continued with brutal efficiency. Ethan's leg was nearly healed now, strong enough for full days in the saddle, checking cattle and mending fences. Clara took over the household completely, cooking, cleaning, managing the children, tending the garden that Margaret had planted years ago and that had gone wild in the months since her death. Between them, they kept the ranch functioning, kept the children thriving, kept up the appearance of a normal frontier marriage. But at night, after the children slept and the day's work was done, the careful distance between them became most apparent. Clara would sit in the rocking chair with her sewing or a book borrowed from Mrs. Henderson. Ethan would work on tack repairs or whittle small toys for the children. They'd exchange pleasantries about the day's events, discuss what needed doing tomorrow, maintain the polite facade of cordial strangers sharing a home. It was civilized, practical, exactly what they'd agreed to. It was also slowly driving Ethan mad, not because he wanted more from Clara. He was careful not to examine those particular thoughts too closely, but because the distance felt dishonest somehow. They were partners in everything except the one thing that mattered most: trust. Real trust. The kind that came from knowing someone's fears and dreams and disappointments, not just their daily routines. On the 8th day of their marriage, Doc Brennan arrived for his final check of Ethan's leg. He pronounced it fully healed, though he warned that the calf muscle would always be weaker than before, always prone to cramping in cold weather. "You're a fortunate man, Cole," the doctor said, packing up his instruments. Mrs. Cole saved your life with that drainage. Most people don't have the knowledge or the nerve to do what she did." "I know. Do you?" Doc Brennan fixed him with a sharp look. "Because from where I'm standing, you've got a wife who's capable and intelligent and devoted to your children, and you're treating her like a hired housekeeper." The accusation stung because it was partially true. "That's not... We have an understanding." "An understanding," the doctor snorted. "Marriage isn't an understanding, son. It's a partnership, and partnerships require communication, trust, mutual respect. We have respect. Do you have honesty? Do you talk to each other about anything that matters? Or do you just divide up the chores and pretend that's enough?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "With respect, Doc, my marriage is my business." "Fair enough. But when that woman came racing into town in the middle of the night to fetch me, she wasn't thinking about arrangements or understandings. She was terrified. Terrified you'd die. Terrified she'd fail those children. Terrified of being alone again." Doc Brennan stood, gathering his bag. "She risked everything to help you. Might want to think about whether you're giving her anything worth having in return." After the doctor left, Ethan stood on the porch and stared out at his land without really seeing it. The words burrowed under his skin like splinters, painful and persistent. Was he giving Clara anything worth having? A name, yes. Protection from gossip, a roof over her head. But what else? Companionship? Barely. Appreciation? He thanked her for meals and for managing the children, but those were surface courtesies, automatic and meaningless. Trust? No. He'd kept her at arm's length deliberately, afraid of what might happen if he let her closer, afraid of betraying Margaret, afraid of needing someone again only to lose them. Afraid of everything, apparently. Clara came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Doc Brennan said you're fully healed. That's good news." "Yes." She stood beside him, not quite touching, following his gaze out over the ranch. "You're quiet. Thinking." "About?" Ethan glanced at her. She looked tired, her hair escaping from its bun, a smudge of flour on her cheek. Beautiful in the way that useful things were beautiful, honest and real and necessary. "About how I'm failing at this," he said. Clara turned to face him fully, surprise clear in her expression. "Failing at what?" "Being a husband, a partner. Doc Brennan pointed out that I'm treating you like an employee rather than a wife, and he's right. We agreed this was a practical arrangement. We did. But practical doesn't have to mean cold. Doesn't have to mean keeping you at a distance like you might contaminate me if I get too close." Clara's breath caught. "I don't feel kept at a distance." "Don't you?" Ethan turned to face her fully. "We live in the same house. We raise the same children. We work the same land. But we don't really talk. Not about anything that matters. I don't know what you're thinking half the time. Don't know if you're happy or miserable or somewhere in between." Clara paused, seeming to genuinely consider the question. I'm adjusting, that's all. Learning how to be a wife and mother when I never expected to be either. Are you sorry you... No. The answer came quickly, without hesitation. No, I'm not sorry. These children, your children. They've given me purpose I didn't have before. Even on the hardest days, I'm not sorry. But... Clara's smile was sad. But sometimes I wonder if this is all there is. If we'll just keep orbiting each other politely for the next 40 years, never quite connecting, never quite understanding each other. What would you want instead? I don't know. Friendship, maybe? The kind where we can talk honestly about our fears and frustrations without worrying about maintaining some facade of perfect partnership. Clara looked down at her hands. My parents had that. They'd argue sometimes, but they also laughed together. Talked for hours about everything and nothing. I used to think that was what marriage was supposed to be. And now? Now, I think maybe that was exceptional. Maybe most marriages are like ours, functional and respectful, but lacking that spark of real connection. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and wiped the flour smudge from her cheek. She stilled but didn't retreat. I don't want that for us, he said quietly. I don't want 40 years of polite distance. I want... He struggled to articulate what he barely understood himself. I want to know you, really know you, your fears and your hopes, and what makes you laugh. I want you to know me the same way. Not because we're in love, I'm not promising that, but because we're partners, and partners should understand each other. Clara's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'd like that too. Then let's start now. Ask me something, anything you want to know. Anything? Anything. Clara considered, then asked, Do you still love Margaret? The question struck deep, but Ethan forced himself to answer honestly. Yes, but not the way I did when she was alive. It's different now, more like honoring a memory than living in it. She was my wife for 8 years, the mother of my children. I'll always love what we had together. But she's gone, and I'm still here, and I have to figure out how to keep living. Do you feel guilty about marrying me? Sometimes. Mostly I feel guilty about not feeling guilty enough. It's only been 9 months. By rights, I should still be drowning in grief. But instead, I'm just... He paused. Grateful. To be alive. To have help. To have someone who cares about my children. Clara nodded slowly. My turn? Your turn. She took a breath. Ask me anything. Ethan thought about all the things he didn't know about this woman he'd married. Finally, he settled on, Why did you really come west? And don't tell me it was just to teach school. Clara's laugh was hollow. You're right. Teaching was the excuse, not the reason. She moved to lean against the porch railing, putting a little distance between them. After my parents died, I fell apart. Completely. I couldn't sleep in our house because every room reminded me of them. Couldn't walk down familiar streets without seeing their ghosts. My aunt wanted me to come live with her in Boston, but the thought of being absorbed into someone else's life, of being the poor relation dependent on charity, I couldn't bear it. So you ran. I ran. I sold everything, took the first teaching position I could find that was far enough away that no one would know me or my history. I thought distance would help, that starting over in a place with no memories would make the grief more bearable. She wiped her eyes roughly. But grief doesn't care about geography. It follows you everywhere. I was just as broken here as I was back east. Maybe more so, because at least there I had people who knew me, who understood my loss. And then you found me bleeding out on my porch. And then I found you bleeding out on your porch, Clara agreed. And suddenly I had something immediate to focus on. Someone who needed me right then, in that moment. Not because of who I used to be, but because of what I could do. It was, she searched for words, anchoring. Like I'd been floating untethered and finally found something solid to hold on to. The children. Yes. And you, though I didn't realize it at first. Clara met his eyes. You needed help, but you weren't helpless. You were trying so hard to keep everything together, to be enough for 4 babies when anyone could see you were drowning. I recognize that feeling, that desperation to be sufficient when you know you're not. Ethan moved to stand beside her at the railing. Their shoulders nearly touched. So we're both broken people trying to hold each other up. Apparently. That's not much of a foundation for a marriage. No, Clara agreed, but it's honest, and maybe honesty is enough to start with. They stood in companionable silence as the sun angled toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. From inside the cabin came the sounds of the children playing, Rebecca's patient voice explaining something to the twins, Samuel's babbling responses. "I'm afraid," Clara said suddenly, "of caring too much, of letting myself love those children so completely that losing them would destroy me, of building a life here and then having it all collapse. That's a reasonable fear. This land has a way of taking what you love. How do you bear it, knowing that at any moment everything could fall apart?" Ethan thought about Margaret dying, about the snake bite, about all the close calls and near misses that defined frontier life. You bear it because the alternative is not living at all, not loving, not trying, and that seems like a worse death than any the land could give you. Clara turned to him with something like wonder in her eyes. That's very wise. Margaret used to say something similar. She said fear was just love wearing a different face, that if you weren't afraid of losing something, it meant you didn't value it enough. She was right. She usually was, about everything except her own mortality. She thought she'd beat that fever, kept saying she just needed one more day to rest and she'd be fine. Ethan's voice roughened. She fought so hard. Right up until the end, she fought, but some fights you can't win. Clara reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, supportive, asking nothing. Ethan squeezed her fingers gently. "I'm afraid too," he admitted, "of needing you, of depending on you and then having you realize this isn't what you want after all, of my children loving you and then losing another mother. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. No one can. Life doesn't work that way." "No," Clara agreed, "but I can promise that I'll try, that I'll be here as long as I'm able, that I won't leave by choice, only by circumstance." It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't even close to the security Ethan wanted, but it was honest, and honesty was more valuable than false promises. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being willing to try. For caring about my children. For saving my life." He paused. "For trusting me with your fear." Clara's smile was small but genuine. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two terrified people pretending to be brave. All bravery is just fear that decided to keep going anyway. More of Margaret's wisdom? No, that one's mine." They stayed on the porch until Rebecca called them for supper, soup Clara had made from the last of the vegetables in the garden and bread she'd baked that morning. The meal was simple but good, the children's chatter filling the spaces where adult conversation might have been. After the children were in bed, Clara and Ethan sat together by the fire. Not in their usual spots on opposite sides of the room, but closer, sharing the space more equally. Clara worked on mending one of Matthew's shirts, while Ethan carved a simple horse from a piece of scrap wood for Rebecca. "Tell me about your parents," Ethan said. "What were they like?" Clara's hand stilled on the mending. "My father was brilliant, dedicated. He'd spend hours with patients who couldn't afford to pay him, teaching them how to care for their own illnesses because he knew they'd never call for a doctor otherwise. My mother was his balance, practical, organized, the one who made sure he ate and slept and didn't work himself to death." She smiled sadly. Though in the end, she died first. The cholera took her in 3 days. My father followed her within the week. I think he just gave up, couldn't imagine life without her. That's a kind of love most people never find. It is. But it also means that when one dies, the other is completely lost. I used to think their devotion was beautiful. Now I wonder if it was healthy. If maybe they should have had more separate identities, more ability to exist independently. "You mean like us?" Clara glanced up, caught his eye, and laughed. "Yes, exactly like us. Two people so independent we can barely admit we need each other. But we're learning. Are we? We're here, aren't we? Talking honestly instead of hiding behind polite distance. That's progress." Clara set aside the mending and moved to sit in the chair closer to him. "Tell me about your family. I know about Margaret, but what about before her? Your parents, siblings?" "No siblings. My mother died when I was 12. Consumption. My father raised me alone, taught me everything about ranching and surviving on this land. He was hard but fair, didn't talk much about feelings but showed love through teaching, through making sure I could stand on my own. Ethan focused on the wood in his hands, shaving away thin curls with careful precision. He died 5 years ago. Heart gave out while he was checking the cattle. By the time I found him, he'd been gone for hours. I'm sorry. So am I. He never got to meet Rebecca. Never knew he had grandchildren. I think he would have loved them in his quiet way. Is that why you're so determined to keep this ranch running? To honor his memory? Ethan considered the question honestly. Partially. But also because it's mine. The only thing in this world that's truly mine. Margaret's family wanted her to move back east after my father died. Said frontier life was too dangerous. She refused, said this was our home, our children's inheritance. We built this together, and I won't let it fail. Even if it's killing you? It's not killing me. It's just hard. There's a difference between hard and impossible, Ethan. You were trying to run this entire ranch alone while caring for 4 babies. That's not sustainable. I know. That's why I married you. The words came out more blunt than he'd intended. Clara flinched slightly. I'm sorry, Ethan said quickly. That sounded... I didn't mean it like it was purely transactional. Didn't you? Clara's voice was level, but he could hear the hurt underneath. We've been honest about what this marriage is, a practical arrangement. You needed help. I needed security. There's no shame in admitting that. But it's not just that anymore. Or at least it doesn't have to be. What do you want it to be? Ethan set down his carving and turned to face her fully. I want us to be partners. Real partners. The kind who trust each other, who rely on each other, who actually enjoy each other's company. I want to stop treating you like you might disappear if I care too much. I want... He stopped, surprised by the intensity of his own feelings. I want this marriage to mean something beyond survival. Claire's eyes searched his face. You're asking for friendship. Yes. Is that too much? No, it's not too much. It's actually... Her voice wavered. It's what I've been hoping for. But I was afraid to ask because I didn't want to seem needy or demanding. You're neither of those things. You don't know that. You don't know me well enough yet. Then let me learn. Ethan reached out and took her hand again, holding it between both of his. Let's stop being so careful with each other. Stop pretending we're fine with distance when what we both want is connection. Claire's fingers curled around his, holding on. I'm terrified of this. Of wanting more and being disappointed. Of opening my heart and having it broken again. I know, I'm terrified too. But Doc Brennan was right. We can't build a real partnership on polite avoidance. We have to risk something. What if we fail? Then we fail together, and at least we'll have tried. Clara was quiet for a long moment, her eyes reflecting the firelight, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. All right, let's try. But you have to promise me something. Anything. Promise me honesty. Even when it's hard. Even when the truth might hurt. I can handle disappointment, Ethan, but I can't handle deception. I need to know where I stand always. I promise. And you promise me the same. I promise. They sat holding hands by the fire, and something shifted between them. Not love. They weren't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. But something almost as valuable. The beginning of trust. Over the following days, they tested the boundaries of their new understanding. Clara began sharing more about her days, her frustrations with the twins' stubbornness, her delight when Rebecca learned to write her name, her fears about whether she was doing enough for Samuel, who seemed smaller and more fragile than the others had been at his age. Ethan, in turn, shared his worries about the ranch, the cattle that had wandered too far north and might be lost, the fence posts that were rotting faster than he could replace them, the dwindling savings and mounting debts that kept him awake at night calculating impossible numbers. They discovered they made each other laugh. Clara had a dry wit that caught Ethan off guard, making him chuckle at observations about their neighbors or the absurdities of frontier life. Ethan could tell stories about his early days ranching that had Clara doubled over with laughter at his youthful mistakes and near disasters. They also discovered they could disagree without destroying the fragile peace between them. Clara thought they should plant more of the garden in potatoes for winter storage. Ethan wanted to focus on cash crops they could sell. They debated, compromised, ended up doing a bit of both. Neither resented the other's perspective. Instead, they found their combined judgment was better than either alone. 3 weeks into their marriage, Mary Brennan arrived for her usual afternoon shift with the children and found Ethan and Clara working together to repair the corral fence. They'd been laughing about something, standing close, Clara handing Ethan nails while he hammered. The easy partnership between them was evident. Mary smiled. "You two look happy." Clara and Ethan exchanged glances. Happy wasn't quite the word, but content maybe, settled, like they'd found a rhythm that worked. "We're getting there," Clara said. And they were. Slowly, carefully, they were building something that resembled not just a functional marriage, but an actual friendship. They weren't in love. Both were careful not to confuse growing affection with romantic feeling, but they liked each other, respected each other, found comfort in each other's presence. It wasn't what either had imagined when they spoke their vows, but it was real, and it was theirs. And for the first time since Margaret's death, Ethan felt like he might actually survive this life he'd been given. One evening in late August, after a particularly long day of harvesting the garden and preserving vegetables for winter, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset. The children were already asleep, exhausted from helping, or more accurately, from getting in the way while trying to help. "I've been thinking," Clara said. About? About the future. About what we're building here." She turned to look at him. "I know we agreed this marriage was practical, not permanent, that if it didn't work, we'd revisit the arrangement." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Are you unhappy?" "No, that's not. I'm trying to say the opposite." Clara took a breath. "I don't want to revisit the arrangement. I want to commit to this, fully. Not as a trial or an experiment, but as a real marriage. I want to build a life here, with you, with the children. I want this to be my home, not just a temporary shelter." Relief flooded through Ethan so powerfully it almost hurt. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything." Clara's smile was tentative but genuine. "I know we're not in love. Maybe we never will be. But we're partners, friends. We're building something good here, and I don't want to walk away from that." Ethan reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. "Neither do I. I want you here, Clara. Want you to stay. Want this to be real." Then it settled. No more escape clauses, no more wondering if the other is going to leave. We're in this together. "Together," Ethan agreed. They sat holding hands as darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, brilliant and endless in the Wyoming sky. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Closer, the cattle lowed peacefully. The ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms, full of small sounds and comfortable silences. And for the first time since that terrible day when a rattlesnake had nearly ended everything, Ethan felt something that might have been happiness. Not the wild, passionate happiness of his youth, but something steadier, deeper. The happiness that came from having a partner who understood him, children who were thriving, a future that looked survivable. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that would have been unthinkable a month ago. Ethan pulled her closer, held her there, and let himself imagine the years ahead. Hard years, certainly. This land would never be easy, but years they'd face together, sharing burdens and joys in equal measure. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For the bread." Clara laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're thanking me for bread I brought over a month ago?" "That bread changed everything. If you hadn't come that day—" "But I did, and here we are." "Here we are," Ethan echoed. And there they stayed, watching the stars wheel overhead, holding on to each other and the fragile, beautiful thing they were building together from necessity and honesty, and the slow, careful growth of trust. September arrived with the first hint of autumn in the air, a crispness to the mornings that hadn't been there before. The grass turning from green to gold, the aspens on the distant mountainsides beginning their slow transformation to flame. It was Clara's favorite time of year, she confessed one morning while making breakfast. The season of harvest and preparation, of gathering in what had been sown, of making ready for the hard months ahead. School would start in 2 weeks. The school board had quietly dropped their objections to Clara's appointment once she became Mrs. Cole, respectability restored by the simple expedient of a gold band and a legal document. Clara surprised everyone, Ethan most of all, by declining the position. "I can't teach and manage 4 children and help run this ranch," she explained to Mrs. Henderson, who'd come to deliver the official offer. "Something would suffer, and I won't do that to these babies. They've already lost one mother. They need stability now, not a woman stretched too thin to give them proper attention." Mrs. Henderson had nodded approvingly. "You're making the right choice, though I'm sorry to lose you. The board will find someone else." After the older woman left, Ethan found Clara in the garden, supposedly weeding, but really just sitting among the potato plants with dirt on her hands and tears on her face. "Regrets?" he asked gently. "Some." Clara wiped her eyes, leaving a smudge of soil on her cheek. "Teaching was supposed to be my fresh start, my purpose, and now I'm giving it up. For a different purpose. I know, and I meant what I said. The children need me more than the school does, but it's still hard, letting go of what I thought my life would be." Ethan sat beside her in the dirt, his leg protesting only slightly now. Margaret had dreams too. She wanted to start a lending library in town, wanted to teach music to the children in the area. She gave all that up when the babies started coming, said maybe later, when they were older, but he didn't need to finish. Later had never come. Do you think she resented it, giving up her dreams? I think she mourned them, but I also think she found new dreams, different ones. She used to say that life was about adapting, not about forcing reality to match your expectations. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture natural now, after weeks of gradual closeness. "Your wife was very wise." She was, though she'd probably laugh if she could see us now, sitting in the potato patch having philosophical discussions. Why would she laugh? Because I was never good at this, talking about feelings, examining life too closely. Margaret had to drag every emotion out of me like pulling teeth. She'd be amazed that I'm doing it voluntarily. Clara lifted her head to look at him. "Maybe I'm a good influence." "You are, in more ways than I expected." They sat together until Rebecca came looking for them, demanding to know why Mama Clara was sitting in the dirt when there were biscuits to be made and brothers to be fed. The moment passed, but something had shifted again. Another layer of distance stripped away, another piece of honesty shared. The harvest came in better than expected. The garden yielded enough vegetables to fill the root cellar and then some, which Clara preserved in jars with the help of Mary Brennan and several other women from town who decided that Clara was respectable after all and worth befriending. The wheat crop was modest but sufficient. The cattle had multiplied, and Ethan was able to sell several head for decent prices at the stock auction in town. For the first time in months, there was a little money. Not much, but enough to pay down some debts, to buy winter supplies without relying entirely on credit, to breathe a bit easier when calculating the ranch's survival. "We might actually make it through the winter," Ethan said one evening, reviewing the ledgers with Clara. She'd taken over the bookkeeping, her neat handwriting replacing his scrawled numbers, her systematic approach to tracking expenses far superior to his haphazard methods. "Of course we will," Clara said, not looking up from the column of figures she was adding. "We're resourceful. We work hard. We have each other." The casual confidence in her voice made Ethan smile. A few months ago, she'd been a terrified stranger contemplating running away. Now she spoke about their future with certainty, with ownership. This was her ranch too, her family, her life. "I'm proud of you," Ethan said. Clara did look up then, surprised. "For what?" "For everything. For staying when you could have left. For choosing this life even though it's harder than teaching school ever would have been. For loving my children like they're your own." "They are my own. Maybe not by blood, but in every way that matters." Claire's expression softened. "I never thought I'd be a mother. After my parents died, I assumed I'd just be alone forever, teaching other people's children but never having any of my own. And now I have 4, and I can't imagine life without them." "They can't imagine life without you either. Rebecca told me yesterday that she doesn't remember what it was like before you came. Said you've always been her mama." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "She said that?" "She did, and she's right in a way. You've been here for most of her conscious memory. You're the mother she'll actually remember growing up with." That's... Clara's voice broke. That's the most beautiful and most heartbreaking thing anyone's ever said to me. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. I'm glad it was you. Glad you were the one who came with that loaf of bread. Glad you stayed. Glad you're here. So am I. They finished the bookkeeping together, shoulders touching, occasionally consulting each other on decisions about winter supplies and necessary repairs. The easy partnership between them had become second nature now. They moved through their days in comfortable synchronization, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other's efforts, building something larger than either could have managed alone. October brought the first real cold snap. Frost painted the windows in delicate patterns, and Ethan woke early one morning to find ice in the water bucket. Winter was coming, and with it all the challenges of keeping a ranch and 4 children alive through Wyoming's brutal cold. But he wasn't facing it alone this time. Clara had already started preparing. She'd spent weeks sewing warmer clothes for the children, letting out hems and sleeves to accommodate their growing bodies. She'd helped Ethan chink the gaps in the cabin walls with mud and moss, making it as tight against the wind as possible. She'd organized the root cellar with military precision, rotating stock so nothing would spoil, planning meals that would stretch their resources through the long months ahead. One afternoon, while the children napped, Clara pulled out a bundle of fabric she'd been hiding in her room. I made you something, she said, almost shyly. It was a heavy wool coat, lined with flannel, stitched with care. Ethan held it up, marveling at the workmanship. When did you have time for this? Late at night, after you'd gone to bed. I noticed your old coat was more holes than fabric, and I thought... She shrugged. Winter's hard enough without inadequate clothing. Ethan tried it on. It fit perfectly, warm and well made, the kind of garment that would last years. Thank you. Clara, this is too much. It's not too much. You're my husband. Taking care of you is part of taking care of this family. The word husband still sounded strange coming from her lips. But not wrong. Not anymore. I have something for you too, Ethan said. He'd been waiting for the right moment. Wait here. He went to the barn and returned with a wooden chest, smaller than a trunk but large enough to hold treasures. He'd spent weeks making it in stolen moments, carving Clara's initials into the lid, sanding it smooth, rubbing it with oil until the wood glowed. Clara's hand flew to her mouth when she saw it. You made this? For you, for your things. You've been keeping everything in that old carpet bag, and I thought... Now it was his turn to shrug. Everyone needs a place for their treasures. Clara ran her fingers over the carved initials, over the smooth wood, over the brass hinges he'd bartered for in town. It's beautiful. I've never had anything so fine. You deserve fine things. I deserve honesty and partnership and being valued. Those matter more than fine things. But she was smiling, cradling the chest like it was precious. Though this is lovely. Thank you. She kissed his cheek, quick and impulsive, then pulled back looking almost startled by her own boldness. Ethan's hand came up to touch where her lips had been, warmth spreading through his chest. You're welcome, he managed. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, something unspoken humming in the air between them. Not quite romance, not quite desire, but definitely affection, definitely caring, the foundation of something that could become love if they let it. The moment was broken by Samuel crying from the bedroom. Clara hurried to tend to him, leaving Ethan standing with the ghost of that kiss still tingling on his skin. He was in trouble, deep trouble, because somewhere between that first day and now, between necessity and partnership and shared burdens, he'd started to fall for his practical, no-nonsense wife. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so careful not to let this happen, had guarded his heart, kept his distance, reminded himself constantly that this was an arrangement, not a real marriage. But hearts didn't care about careful planning. They did what they wanted, loved who they wanted, regardless of logic or timing or whether it was wise. And his heart, apparently, wanted Clara. The knowledge terrified him. Loving someone meant risking loss, meant opening himself up to the kind of devastating pain he'd felt when Margaret died. He wasn't sure he could survive that again, wasn't sure he was strong enough to risk it, but he also wasn't sure he could stop it from happening. Over the following weeks, Ethan found himself noticing things about Clara he'd been deliberately overlooking. The way she hummed while she worked, always those same tuneless melodies. The way she laughed at the twins' antics, genuine and unguarded. The way she read to Rebecca at night, doing different voices for each character, making his daughter giggle with delight. The way she looked at him, some thought he wasn't watching, her expression soft and wondering, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. He caught her one evening after the children were asleep, standing at the window as she always did, staring out at the darkness. But this time when he joined her, he stood close enough that their shoulders touched. "What do you think about out here?" he asked. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Everything. Nothing. How strange life is. How I came here expecting one thing and found something completely different. Better or worse than you expected. Both. Harder in some ways. I underestimated how exhausting 4 children could be, but better in others." She glanced at him. "I thought I'd always be alone. Thought that when my parents died, my chance at family died with them. But I was wrong. Family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's showing up every day and doing the work and caring even when it's hard. We're your family. You are. And I'm yours. Not by blood or even by love necessarily, but by commitment, by choice. That feels more real somehow than the alternative." Ethan took a breath, gathering courage. What if it was by love? Clara went very still. What? What if it was by love? Would that change things? "Ethan, we agreed." "I know what we agreed, but I'm starting to think we were wrong. Or at least incomplete." He turned to face her fully. "I'm falling in love with you, Clara. Maybe I already have. I didn't mean to, didn't want to. But somewhere between you saving my life and learning to trust you and watching you become a mother to my children, it happened anyway." Clara's eyes were huge in the lamplight. "You can't. We said this was practical. It was practical. It still is. But it's also becoming something more, at least for me." Ethan reached for her hand, held it gently. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I know that's not fair. But I needed to be honest. Needed you to know that this isn't just partnership anymore. Not for me. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Whatever you feel or don't feel, it doesn't change our arrangement. You're still my partner, still safe here, still valued. This is still your home." Clara pulled her hand free, but gently. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller somehow. "I need to think." "Of course, take all the time you need." She fled to her room, closing the door softly behind her. Ethan stood alone in the main room, wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake. If he'd scared her, pushed too hard, asked for more than she could give. But he'd promised honesty. And love, even unrequited, was honest. He'd just have to live with whatever consequences that honesty brought. Clara avoided him for 2 days. Not obviously. She still cooked meals and cared for the children and did all her usual tasks. But she didn't seek him out, didn't make eye contact, didn't sit with him in the evenings. The easy companionship they'd built crumbled back into polite distance, and Ethan hated it. On the 3rd day, he found her in the barn, supposedly collecting eggs, but really just standing among the chickens with her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. "Clara!" He approached slowly, carefully, like she was a wounded animal that might bolt. "Talk to me. Please." "I can't do this," she whispered. "Can't do what?" "Can't." She gestured helplessly. "This. Love. Opening my heart again. I told you I was afraid of caring too much, and now you're asking me to do exactly that. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you how I feel. But it changes everything. We had an arrangement, a safe, predictable arrangement where no one got hurt because no one expected too much. And now you're changing the rules." Ethan moved closer. "Life changed the rules, not me. Feelings don't follow agreements, Clara. They just happen." "I don't want them to happen. I don't want to love you and then lose you, like I lost everyone else I've ever loved." Her voice broke on a sob. "My parents, my home, everything, it all gets taken away eventually. I can't survive losing someone else. I can't." "So you'd rather feel nothing, live half a life because you're afraid of loss?" "Yes. At least then I'm in control. At least then I know what to expect." Ethan reached for her, pulled her into his arms despite her resistance. She fought for a moment, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her while she cried, stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. "I know you're scared," he said, when her tears finally slowed. "I'm scared too. Loving someone is terrifying because loss is inevitable. But Clara, the loss is going to hurt whether we love each other or not. If something happens to me, you'll grieve. If something happens to you, I'll grieve. That's the cost of caring about anyone." Then what's the point? The point is that love makes the time we have matter more, makes the ordinary moments extraordinary, turns survival into actually living. He pulled back enough to see her face, to wipe the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I loved Margaret. When she died, I thought the pain would kill me. And maybe part of me did die with her, but I'm still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling something other than grief, and that's because of you. Ethan, you don't have to love me back. I meant what I said. That's not a condition of our partnership. But don't shut yourself off from the possibility because you're afraid. Don't choose numbness over risk." Clara's eyes searched his face, looking for something. Reassurance, maybe, or permission. "What if I'm not strong enough? You're the strongest person I know. You dragged a dying man into his house and cut venom from his leg. You took on 4 children who weren't yours. You've built a life in a place that's foreign to everything you knew. You're strong enough for anything. What if I love you and you stop loving me? What if I'm not enough? You're already enough, more than enough. You're everything I didn't know I needed." Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but these seemed different, softer. "I think I might love you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Ethan's heart stuttered in his chest. "Say that again." "I love you," or "I'm falling in love with you," or something in between. Clara's laugh was watery and uncertain. "I've been fighting it for weeks, telling myself it was just gratitude or partnership or getting used to having help. But it's more than that. It's the way my day doesn't feel complete until I see you smile. It's how I listen for your footsteps, how I save up small stories to tell you at dinner. It's—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "It's love," Ethan finished for her. "Yes, it's love, and I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything. Just feel it. Let it exist. We'll figure out the rest together." Clara nodded, hiccuping slightly. "Together. Together." He kissed her then, soft and gentle, asking permission with every movement. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt. The kiss was nothing like the passionate embraces of youth. It was tender and careful and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Clara laughed. "That was worth the wait? Worth everything." They stood holding each other in the barn while chickens pecked around their feet and dust motes danced in the afternoon light. It wasn't a grand romantic moment from the novels Clara used to read. It was better. It was real. That evening, after the children were fed and bathed and tucked into bed, Clara moved her few belongings from the sewing room into Ethan's bedroom. Not because they had to, not because convention demanded it, but because they wanted to. Because sleeping apart felt wrong now, felt like denying what they'd finally admitted. They lay together in the darkness, Clara's head on Ethan's chest, his arm around her shoulders. Neither spoke, both just savoring the newness of this, the rightness of it. "I'm still scared," Clara whispered. "So am I. But less scared than I was before." "Me too." She tilted her head up to kiss his jaw. "Thank you for being patient with me, for not giving up when I pushed you away. Thank you for taking the risk, for choosing to stay. I'll always choose to stay. With you. With our children. This is my home now. Our children." The words settled something deep in Ethan's chest. They weren't just his children anymore. They were theirs. A family built from tragedy and necessity and the slow, miraculous growth of love. Winter came in earnest the following week, bringing snow that piled in drifts against the cabin walls and temperatures that made breath freeze in the air. But inside, the Cole household was warm. The fire burned bright. The children played safely, and Ethan and Clara navigated their new reality with the same careful partnership they'd brought to everything else. Except now there were stolen kisses when the children weren't looking, hands held under the dinner table, quiet conversations in bed at night where they shared dreams and fears, and plans for the future. The practical marriage had become a real one, built on a foundation of honesty and trust and genuine affection. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear. Clara woke before anyone else and made coffee, standing at the window to watch the sun paint the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Ethan found her there, wrapped in the shawl he'd given her, looking content in a way she never had before. "Merry Christmas," he said, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned back against him. "Merry Christmas. Happy. Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." They stood together watching the sunrise, this man and woman who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other by design. Behind them, the children began to stir, Rebecca's excited whisper about presents, the twins' sleepy grumbling, Samuel's cheerful babbling, the sounds of family, of home, of a life that had been cobbled together from broken pieces and made whole through commitment and courage and love. Clara turned in Ethan's arms to face him. "I'm glad I brought you that bread. Best bread I never ate." She laughed and kissed him, and behind them the children tumbled out of bed, demanding attention and breakfast, and to know if there would be presents. They broke apart, moving together to manage the cheerful chaos, partners in all things now. By spring, Clara was pregnant. The realization came slowly, missed courses, morning sickness, a certain fullness to her breast that Ethan noticed before she did. Doc Brennan confirmed it in early March, pronouncing her healthy and predicting an autumn birth. "Another baby," Clara said that night, her hand on her still flat belly, wonder in her voice. "Ours." "Ours," Ethan agreed. The word felt different this time. Not just his child or her child, but theirs together, the product of love rather than just duty. "Are you happy?" "I'm terrified and thrilled and already exhausted at the thought of 5 children instead of 4. Clara smiled through tears. "But yes, I'm happy." Rebecca was delighted at the prospect of another sibling. The twins, at 3 now and starting to understand more, seemed cautiously interested. Samuel, still a baby himself, had no opinion one way or the other. The pregnancy was easier than Margaret's had been. Clara stayed strong and healthy throughout, working alongside Ethan in the garden and with the children, only slowing down in the final months when her belly made bending difficult. Ethan watched her bloom with new life and felt a fierce protectiveness that sometimes overwhelmed him. This would work. He wouldn't lose another wife to childbirth. He couldn't. Not when he'd just found what real partnership felt like. Not when they'd just begun building something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate losses. But fear had no power over fate. He could only do what he'd always done. Work hard, prepare as best he could, and trust that they'd face whatever came together. On a crisp October morning, just as the aspens turned gold and the first frost threatened, Clara woke him before dawn with a gentle shake. "It's time." Ethan had ridden for Doc Brennan before, racing through the night in desperation and fear. This time he rode at dawn in preparation and hope. The doctor arrived quickly, bringing Mrs. Henderson with him as an experienced assistant, and settled into the cabin with calm efficiency. The labor was long, but not dangerous. Clara was strong, determined, walking the cabin floor between contractions, squeezing Ethan's hand hard enough to leave marks. He stayed with her despite Mrs. Henderson's suggestions that he wait outside like most husbands. This was his wife, his child. He wasn't going anywhere. Rebecca took charge of her brothers with surprising competence, keeping them fed and occupied in the other room while the adults focused on the birth. Mary Brennan came to help, adding another pair of capable hands. As the sun reached its peak and began its descent toward evening, Clara gave a final tremendous push, and a baby's cry filled the cabin. A daughter, perfect and pink, and wailing her displeasure at being thrust into the cold world. "She's beautiful," Doc Brennan announced, cleaning the infant and wrapping her in a soft blanket before placing her in Clara's exhausted arms. "Healthy lungs, good color, strong. You did well, Mrs. Cole." Clara stared down at the baby with wonder. "Our daughter, Ethan. We have a daughter." Ethan couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling at the delicate fingers that wrapped instinctively around his. A new life. A new beginning. The physical proof of the love he'd thought he'd never feel again. "What should we name her?" Clara asked. They'd discussed names during the pregnancy but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at his wife cradling their daughter, Ethan thought of all the women who'd brought them to this moment. Margaret, who'd given him Rebecca and the twins and Samuel before her death. Clara's mother, who'd raised her to be capable and strong. Mrs. Henderson, who'd pushed them together when they might have remained separate. But there was one name that felt exactly right. Hope, he said. Let's call her Hope. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Hope. Yes, that's perfect. Because that's what this child represented. Hope for the future. Hope that loss and tragedy didn't have to define them. Hope that broken people could heal and broken lives could be rebuilt into something even more beautiful than before. Rebecca was allowed in to meet her new sister, her eyes huge with wonder as she gently touched Hope's tiny fingers. She's so little, Rebecca whispered, littler than Samuel even. You were this little once, Clara told her. Hard to believe, isn't it? Can I hold her? Clara showed Rebecca how to support the baby's head, how to cradle her carefully. Rebecca sat very still, hardly breathing, gazing at Hope with an expression of absolute devotion. I'm going to protect her always, Rebecca declared. I'm her big sister. That's my job. It is, Ethan agreed, his voice rough with emotion. And you'll be excellent at it. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened toward winter and Hope grew from a tiny newborn into a slightly less tiny infant, the Cole household found its new rhythm. 5 children now instead of 4. More noise, more work, more chaos, but also more joy. Clara bloomed in motherhood, this child she'd carried and birthed, somehow cementing her place in the family in a way adoption never could. Not that the older children were less hers, she loved them all equally, fiercely. But Hope was the bridge between her old life and her new one, the proof that she'd survived loss and found not just contentment, but genuine happiness. Ethan watched his wife with their daughter and felt his heart expand beyond what he'd thought possible. He'd loved Margaret, would always love what they'd had together, but what he felt for Clara was different, deeper, maybe, because it had been earned rather than simply falling into place. They'd chosen each other, fought for each other, built this life together from nothing but determination and hope. On Hope's first Christmas, with snow falling softly outside and the cabin warm with fire and laughter, Ethan pulled Clara aside while the children played with their simple gifts, wooden toys he'd carved, cloth dolls Clara had sewn, small treasures that meant everything in their limited world. Thank you, he said. Clara smiled up at him. For what? I should be thanking you. A year ago I was alone, grieving, lost. Now I have a husband, 5 children, a home, a life that matters. Thank you for the bread. She laughed, the sound warm and rich. You're still on about the bread? Always. That bread changed my life, brought me you. It brought me you too, and this. Clara gestured around the cabin, at the children, at the home they'd built, at the life they'd created together. All of this. From one loaf of bread and a willingness to help a stranger. Sometimes the smallest kindnesses have the biggest impacts. Sometimes they do. They kissed, soft and sweet, surrounded by the sounds of their children and the warmth of their home. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled and snow piled high and winter showed no mercy. But inside, the Cole family was safe, warm, together. And that was all that mattered. Years would pass, the children would grow, there would be more hardships, drought years and harsh winters, illness and injury, all the trials that frontier life demanded. But they would face them together, Ethan and Clara, partners in every sense of the word. Rebecca would grow into a capable young woman who'd eventually teach at the very school her mother had given up. The twins would work the ranch alongside their father, expanding it, making it thrive. Samuel would become a doctor, inspired by stories of the grandfather he'd never met. And Hope would carry her name into the world like a banner, reminding everyone that even from tragedy, even from loss, beautiful things could grow. But that was all future. That night, Christmas of 1876, they were just a family gathered around the fire. A rancher and a would-be teacher who'd found each other by accident and chosen each other by design. 4 children who'd lost a mother and found another. 1 baby who'd never know anything but love. The rattlesnake that had nearly ended everything had instead begun everything. Death had knocked at Ethan's door, but life had answered, in the form of a woman with gray-green eyes and a loaf of bread, in the form of courage and trust and the slow, steady growth of love. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, watching their children play. "I'm glad I stayed." "So am I." "I love you." "I love you too." Simple words, but weighted with everything they'd survived, everything they'd built, everything they'd become to each other. A love that hadn't been planned or expected. A love born from necessity that had transformed into something profound and enduring. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their endless dance. The wind sang through the pines. The land stretched vast and unforgiving in all directions. But inside, the Cole family was home, and they were whole.